Hey everybody, if you want to skip right to the interview, skip to about 6 minutes. All right, welcome to episode number 36 of the podcast. Very, very special episode today. I think you'll be able to tell from the interview, I think I talked about this a couple times, just how excited I was to have my first comedian on. And sorry, my voice sounds so rough. I think doing about 6 hours of podcasts and a couple of other things has really made my voice almost go. Hopefully you guys can still understand me. It sounds a little rough. It feels a little rough, but we'll get through it here. Maybe a little shorter intro. But yeah, like I was saying, was really excited to get my first comedian on. It was one of the things that I really started this podcast for, was to talk about my interest in comedies, right up there with at the top. And I knew I always wanted to have comedians on. I just didn't really know how or who to ask or what kind of size comedian I could take a swing at. And luckily enough, Brendan kind of gave me a little tip that, here's this guy, Lars, who is not only an amazing comic, but also just a hard worker, really genuine guy, right kind of up the alley of what I'm into about, helping others and, not being selfish with his time or with his love. And I think that's more so even than comedy itself was what I was excited about. And then when we sat down and started to talk, it was really fun. And I think just like so many other things on this podcast, it's just funny how it works out, and things I've stressed over for so long just kind of fall into place like this, and I have the perfect guest like Lars to launch me into my first podcast with a comedian. So I'm really excited about that. And just to tell you guys a little bit about Lars. He has been doing comedy for I think about 17 or 18 years now. From the early 2000s, he's done three tours overseas, performing for the troops. He started the Okanagan Comedy Festival that's been going I think for about 6 or 7 years now. Obviously not with COVID, but she'll be back up and running here soon. He's gone to Montreal Comedy Festival. He's placed highly in a bunch of comedy competitions down the States. He's got a 1 hour special for those of you guys listening that know a little bit about comedy. You know how special that is to get a 1 hour special. That's something that most comedians aspire to. It's something I really wanted to ask him about, but just we had so much to talk about. It was hard to fit it all in on this one. But just a really hardworking comic. He just did. He's one of those guys when COVID hit that didn't, let it keep him down. He wanted to get on stage. He did over 150 shows in people's backyards for Fire Pit Comedy this summer, which is just absolutely bananas. I think, and for those of you that know Alberta and Edmonton summers, there's not really 150 days of summer. So like the fact that he fit that many shows in just shows you how many he's probably cranking out 3 or 4 in a day at some point. So just a real nose to the grindstone kind of guy. And that's what comedy is. And I think, unless you are kind of deep into the comedy scene, you don't really realize all the hard work that goes behind it. You kind of see, the 15 minutes, you got the Comedy Network on, you just see these polished bits that people are throwing out, and you don't see the decades of playing for 4 people in little shows and getting shit thrown at you and fist fights and all that stuff that goes into it. And that's the part that I really enjoyed. It was so much fun to talk to somebody and, hear what that's like in person across from someone. And that was just so much fun for me. I enjoyed it. I can't thank Lars enough for coming on and having the discussion we did. I mean, I hope you guys understand just how vulnerable and honest Lars was being, talking about his own comedy. I think people don't realize, they think, it's jokes. Like how deep can that be? But I think a comic's material and their journey is so personal to them, and just talking about finding the comedy that comes from his gut and working to bring that in, and things that he cares about and trying to make those funny and to bring those on stage. That's a very sensitive topic for some people, and I don't want it to go unnoticed how appreciative I am of him being willing to come on and talk about that. I mean, I've heard him on lots of podcasts and it's always funny, lots of good stories, but I'd never even in the 9 or 10 podcasts I listened to, I hadn't heard him talk about that stuff at all. So that was awesome. And talking about New York and I loved every fucking second of this interview. I would interview comedians every day of my life for the rest of my life if I could. I had thought that before, but I couldn't really say that for sure until I got my first guy on and had that chance. And it was so much fun. And so yeah, I hope you guys enjoy it just as much as I did. I'm probably going to be promoting the fuck out of this podcast because I'm so pumped for this to be a success, and I want to make it work so that more comedians want to come on, and I have better chances to have more people like Lars come on and share their story. So please, if you really enjoy this episode, please, first of all, go follow Lars. We didn't get into it much, but his Twitter following is quite the place to be. So I definitely recommend following him on Twitter, even if you're not a big Twitter person. Definitely on Instagram, anywhere you can. He's got stand up that he can send you too. He's a real nice guy. Reach out to him, send him a message if you liked him on here. Let him know you heard him and you enjoyed the conversation. Yeah. So first of all, go follow him. Then if you do enjoy this episode, please share it with somebody else. Please also follow the VonDubCast social media. Go to the YouTube page and subscribe, please. That would be a really big help. And yeah, thank you guys so much. I'm not going to kind of get into the personal stuff on this just because I also did my first solo episode this weekend. That's why my voice is so hooped here. It's been a lot of talking. So you'll get to kind of hear what the latest I've been up to on there. So maybe we'll just cut her there and let us get right into the episode. Yeah, this is a really special one, guys. So I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I did, and I hope it's not too inside baseball with some of the comedy stuff we get into. So, all right, sounds good. See you in the outro. All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Lars. One of my most special guests. Not to put the pressure on you, but when I started this podcast, comedy was one of the things that I really wanted to get into. If I wanted to kind of have a little bit of mix of everything, but if I had to pick one thing and I had to interview one type for the rest of my life, it would be comics. And that's what I wanted to dive into. And I hold comedy on such a high pedestal that I was so worried for so long to ask any type of comic, and I had all these plans in my head of how I was going to go through it, and there's so much fear there because I have built it up so much that it took something like Brendan saying, "Hey, I might know somebody that can come in," right? And then even took me probably 3 weeks since that first time just to get the courage up to ask you. So thanks for being here. Not to add a little extra pressure to it, but you're a pro.
Well, there's zero pressure from my side because talking about comedy is my favorite thing to do.
Beautiful
in the world.
Yeah,
I think. In the hierarchy of entertainment, comedians are only above maybe one group.
Yeah.
They really, I mean, from musicians to actors to painters to sculptors I think once you get to the very bottom of the entertainment world, I think it goes rodeo clowns, comedians, mimes. I don't think there's anybody other than mimes below.
Yeah.
And by the way, if you're a mime and you're listening to this, we are better than you.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're not better than anyone else.
Yeah, we got to take that swing.
But I feel like we're above mimes by a little bit.
Yeah.
So having done this job as long as I have, and having been a fan of comedy my whole life, it was fun, and I really enjoyed. Last night I had a bunch of work to do before bed.
Yeah.
And so I randomly picked one of your episodes.
Oh, yeah?
Random. I just literally just threw a dart. And it turned out to be the one where your sister was interviewing you.
Oh, yeah?
And I really enjoyed how fond she was of you and your passion for this thing. It was, you can hear it. If people haven't had a chance to listen to that one, they should, because she is so supportive and has so many positive things to say, and was really a big fan of not just you, but your passion for this medium, for this thing.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to listen to how little respect you have for people who listen to these at normal speed.
Yeah, it just complete disdain, right? Oh, man. Oh, that's good that you caught that, because that's only come up. It's funny that you say you just caught that on that episode, because that probably comes up about, 2/3 of the podcast. I think that topic of speeding up your podcast comes up, and the definite disdain for people that can't cut it at 1.5 at least. I mean, get real. 1.5. Who can't do that shit?
I enjoy the conversational experience of it. I'm a voracious. I have a voracious appetite for audiobooks.
Yeah.
But I really like the experience of the audiobook at normal speed.
Right.
The first time I listened to a podcast at a faster speed was with a comedian named Brent Ayton, who's a comedian from Edmonton.
Okay.
And one of the best writers, one of the most gifted writers. Yeah. He listens to them at 2 times or 3 times, whatever. And so that was my first time. I'm like, wow, people do that. So it was funny to hear how you're like, I got places to be. I got things to do. Let's go. I want to, consume as much of this as I can.
Oh,
so it was funny to me to listen to. It was great. It was really.
Oh, that's
so I've
great.
done. I don't know. I've probably done 8 or 10 shows in Slave Lake.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, beautiful.
And Smith, Alberta.
Oh, Smith.
If you know where Smith is.
I know Smith.
I did the Wildcat Saloon in Smith, Alberta.
Oh, congratulations.
True story. It was I did Valentine's Day, Smith, Alberta. It was a steak dinner for anybody who wanted to come. There was probably, I want to say 40 people, 30 people. It's a small bar. It was fun. The person who owned it was really nice. And every single couple in that bar for Valentine's Day had on camouflage. Not making that up.
That is Smith to a T right there.
It was funny. And so they were really great. And we used to do a steak bar, I think, or a restaurant called Tao.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Lake.
For sure.
We did Tao a bunch of times. And then my parents were musicians.
Right.
And they used to perform 2 or 3 times a year at the Sawridge Hotel.
Oh, beautiful.
So I remember as a kid staying in the Sawridge Hotel. And that's one of the 10 or 12 stages that I played in my career that were the same hotels or stages that my parents played when I was growing up. So it was really neat.
Where else were some of those that you got to?
Beaver Lodge,
Oh,
Alberta.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yep.
Right by where I'm living now.
Yeah. And Kelowna. A few times. And then all over Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So I remember when I played Beaver Lodge, and to bring our listeners up to speed, my parents were professional musicians and we toured with the band as kids. And playing the Beaver Lodge Hotel, knowing, because we toured with the band, so I know all these hotels from when I was a little kid. And I walk into these hotels and I have this feeling of like, wow, I haven't been here for 20 years, 25 years. And to go back and play, there was probably, no kidding, 15 people in the bar that night in Beaver Lodge. And I said to the people who were at the show, I said, you guys don't realize how special this is to me, because I always wanted to be an entertainer. I thought I was going to be a musician.
Yeah.
To stand on that stage and perform in a place where my parents had performed many times 30 years earlier. Yeah. So it was really, those moments for me are some of the most special. And I remember there's a very funny Jamie Pruden, who is Sebastian Steele. He's a very talented hypnotist and artist. So Jamie Pruden, if people want to see some fantastic art, he does. So look up Jamie Pruden art. So Jamie and Bob Beto and I were doing a fundraiser for the fires in Fort McMurray.
Right.
So he asked me if I wanted to perform outside of a grocery store to raise money. Yeah. Absolutely, whatever.
Of course, wherever.
And so there was a guitar player playing for a little while, and then I went up and did probably 20, 25 minutes of comedy, and I walk over, and the guitar player, this older fella, comes over to me, and Stan's his name. He comes over and he goes, hey, I really enjoyed your comedy. And I go, thanks a lot. I go, my parents used to be musicians, so I sure enjoyed it. He goes, who are your parents? I go, it was a long time ago. You wouldn't know them. And I go, they had a band called Columbian Gold Rush. And this old guitar player goes, Dale Callieou's your dad? And I was like, what?
Yeah.
So yeah, he had crossed paths with my parents many times. And, they used to play the rodeo circuit, and they were all over Western Canada. We toured the whole country. And so those moments to me, when I get to share the stage with somebody who shared the stage with my parents, are the most special to me. They're the greatest.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And that was something I definitely wanted to ask you about, because just with being so obsessed with comedy from the outside, I'm always, and I've always had a secret wish to try it and kind of kick it around. Just can't really get the cojones up, you might say, to actually try it. And I think for a long time, what's that?
I can give you the courage to do that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
You can finish the thought. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, but I think always what I kind of break down is for a long time, I think I had this understanding, because I'd always heard that, to be a comedian, you had to have that darkness, right? Of, something in your childhood has to be bad for you to come through. And I had that thought in my head, but then I'd start to see some other comedians that didn't really fit that mold, and it kind of opened my eyes to it. But there's always something, I think, with the process of becoming a comedian, there's so much struggle and clawing, and you have to have that passion to drag you through. And I think what I was seeing is, I think you don't have to have that darkness, but where it becomes a prerequisite is if you go through something like that as a childhood and you have that darkness and you overcome it. Now, those playing in front of 3 people in Beaver Lodge, Alberta, right? And when you drove 9 hours to get there just to get on stage, a lot of people that would break them and they would give up. And I think it's interesting to me to find that you don't have to go through something like that. If you have that fire and you want to just grind, you can come from other places. It doesn't have to come from a place of darkness.
Yeah. I think that's a commonly held belief.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people would think that comedians are very broken human beings. Not entirely wrong.
No,
a lot of times.
Yeah, it seems to hit the mark, 9 times out of 10, maybe 8 out of 10.
I don't know if it'd be that.
And I think it might be changing too.
Well, I don't know. Here's my thoughts. If your sample size was say 1,000.
Sure.
So you interviewed 1,000 taxi drivers.
Right.
And those 1,000 taxi drivers, how many of them would have had traumatic childhoods or like rough upbringings or any? And then you interviewed 1,000 accountants.
Yeah.
And then you interviewed 1,000, professional dancers. And then you got, I think that the bell curve of the people that had real struggle in their life or grew up disadvantaged or, didn't have a lot of money would be almost the exact same as comedians. I don't think that the percentages change.
Right.
I think that it's nice to have a place to get the approval you seek to be a comedian.
Right.
But I had somebody say once, in order to be a comedian, you have to be a pessimist. And I disagreed with that. Yeah. I think in order to be a comedian, you have to be incredibly critical. Yes. I think you have to be skeptical of why is this way. Right. And so for me, a lot of people are like, oh, people are broken. That's why they want to get on stage and do this thing. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. Because they're on stage bearing their soul to the crowd, then it's a little more apparent. Yeah. But if you had that exact same hour-long conversation with somebody who was driving a taxi, you'd realize that they were every bit as broken as a comedian. Right. It's the same across the board, I think. Yeah. And so I don't think the percentages change. The reason that it looks like there's a darkness, in my very humble opinion, is because we're the ones talking about the most dark, deep, deepest.
You're not going to, you got someone in the back of your cab, you're not going to talk about your traumas of your child, you'd hope not. You've probably been in a cab or two where you probably had the opposite to that theory right there. But
sure, you could be standing on a subway train and you go, hey, how's your day? And you see, I make eye contact with somebody, how's your day? Oh, I got my car, blah, blah, blah. Those people exist across all spectrums. Yeah. And so I think that most comedians were people who questioned, why is it that way?
Yeah, definitely.
And I had a funny story after listening to the podcast with your sister. Just sounded, I loved her line of questioning. I truly enjoyed how she was so excited to see you embark on this journey.
She's been probably my biggest supporter all through my life. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really enjoyable. In that entire podcast, you guys never said what your dad did.
He does bulk fuel and lubricants. He sells, so he started about 20 odd years ago with a couple under Suncor as a marketer for Petro-Canada. So he had a couple Petro-Canada stations and has over the years grown it and taken over new. And now he runs pretty much all of Northwest Alberta. And that's now what I do the same thing as him in Grand Prairie that he's doing now.
Yeah. It was fun because you talked about, who's the best business person our dad, who was one of your people you look up to, our dad, and you talk about what a sound business person he was, but at no point did we ever bring talk about what it was.
Well, and I think probably the reason for that too is in those first couple episodes, I knew I wanted so badly. I think, and it's funny how much of this dovetails with comedy, because I think so much of what I look up to in comedy is that honesty and that willingness to talk about those things and be vulnerable on stage or wherever it is. And I think a lot of times it was seeing the comfortability that on stage and talking about those things brings. And then when podcasts started, you started to see these comedians, and that's where I got into podcasts. And my love of podcasts came was comedians. And that's why I have such a tie to them. Yeah. But you would see that honesty come through just conversationally. Now it wasn't these prepackaged, finely honed jokes and bits. But by going to those levels and going down to those depths, now when they get onto a podcast after a while, they have that honesty. But I think in the first couple episodes, I was scared. I was worried about talking about work. I was worried about talking about this. And I was worried about talking about this. Whereas now, that was less than 6 months ago, and I feel completely different. I feel like I will talk about anything. I've taught, since then, I've gotten into some very vulnerable points and some very vulnerable discussions, talked about some real things that I struggle with. And I feel so much better getting out on the other side of it now, because now I feel like whatever comes into an interview and wherever the conversation goes, I'm willing to talk about it, and I'm willing to bring that level of honesty forward. And I think that was, you could probably start to, I bet you could hear some of that in the first couple episodes, where you could see sometimes I, would approach something and then back off. Whereas now, if you want to go there, now it's just about where my guest is willing to go, and I'm willing to go wherever they want, which is exciting to me, because now I feel like I'm really excited to get on to other podcasts and be a guest, because I'm willing to go wherever you want to go. If somebody wants to bring me on their podcast, I would be willing to go wherever they wanted. And I feel like that's exactly what I'm looking for in guests. Yeah. And I found that the guests that I have had on that are maybe not to the same degree of willing, but, I I can probably name a couple of them. Like the first one I probably felt the song was episode 9 with a guy from Slave Lake that started a brewery called Dog Island Brewery, Chad Paulson. An amazing brewery, amazing story what they did, but he was so willing. It didn't matter where the conversation goes, just a real laid back guy and we could go wherever. And I just fed off that and it gave me the confidence to take it places. And, instead of being worried, this might be too heady, this might be too abstract. And he just willing to take it where it went. And I just had so much fun with that. And now I'm just, trying to find that again with all these different guests, right? And not every guest is going to be that. And I have to work on my style as an interview to be able to, when I have that in front of me, I know what to do and I know how to play and I know where I can take it. But then when someone is a little bit more restricted, you have to learn to play within those confines. And
you can feel it.
Yeah.
You can pick up on the body language.
Yeah. And it's something, I don't want to compare it to anything with comedy because I feel like that's just not my place, having not done it. But on another podcast I was listening to you on, you were talking about the transition to this new era of comedy during COVID and how oftentimes when you're on stage, you are tailoring because when you've done comedy as long as you have a plethora of bits that you can go to. You have a lot of things and each crowd.
And they're all gold, by the way.
Yeah, and they're all perfect. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, so good.
Anyway.
But you were talking about how you can read the crowd and know not just like what they're okay with, but also which certain bits you go into. And I'm wondering how you're finding with taking away some of that feedback. Like we were talking about Zoom shows before. I'm curious, when you are on stage, what types of things are you looking for? Is it just a feel or is there some certain things, that directs you where you want to go? And then how are you dealing with losing that, at least to some degree, with these new style of comedies we're being forced into nowadays?
Good question. So I hope that this new virtual comedy stuff ends as quickly as humanly possible.
I think that's
I've done 20, 25 virtual shows. None of them compare to a live audience. Yeah. None of them. No matter how great. So Sheldon Fingler with Infinite Event Services is doing an amazing thing with the setup he has where you can see everybody who's watching.
It's amazing. Well, you showed me before. It was incredible.
Yeah. So Infinite Event Services will take care of you. You want to do a virtual show. They're incredible. As good as that is, I don't even know if I would, and he's one of the best. You'll have the best lights, the best sound, the best cameras, the best backdrop, the best everything.
Yeah.
The best of everything on a virtual show, I think would be
30%.
Not even?
No, not even.
Not even close. I would say, for me personally, 10. I don't even know if I'd go as high as 12%.
Wow.
So what you're talking about as far as like the feel of the material. So I was very, I fall into things. I'm the luckiest person in the world. And I believe that.
Yeah.
When I started working in the casino industry, they gave a bunch of casino licenses to new casinos in Alberta.
Right.
And so new casinos opened up.
Yeah.
4 months after I got my license to be a casino dealer.
Beautiful.
So there's I could have picked my job anywhere. So when I got into comedy, I started comedy in 2003. 2004, I win this amateur comedy competition. So I'm the funniest amateur in Alberta in 2004. And immediately after that, the comic strip opens up in West Edmonton Mall, which is one of the best comedy clubs in North America, one of the best. So now I end up becoming the house MC at this comedy club that just opened. So there's this fledgling comedy club, and I'm a fledgling comedian, and I become the house MC at this. So they do an intro video. It's about 2 minutes long. So they play some music, and there's a bunch of different comedy clips.
Right.
And there was one, it's funny, they're very funny. Now the owner of the Comedy Nest in Montreal, David Acker's his name, but he's a wonderfully brilliant comedian. And so he and Rick Bronson were childhood best friends. So they were playing table hockey, and they you could see them playing table hockey. And then they go car, and then they're playing table hockey in the middle of the road. So they do table hockey. It was one of the first videos. God. So at the end of the last thing that they show was a Saturday Night Live clip on this video.
Yeah.
So now they're playing the intro video. The audience is dark in the room. The audience is getting ready for the comedy show to start. And the last scene was a guy, it's an SNL clip. You could probably just Google it. A guy is standing away from the camera over a desk, and he's wearing a G-string. I remember it being an American flag G-string, but it's a G-string regardless. How the audience reacted to that guy in that G-string, I could tell you what kind of an audience they were going to be in that amount of time.
Right.
So if you've ever read Malcolm Gladwell, there's one called Blink, and it talks about how we're able to make decisions based on our experience. So if you've read Blink.
And your subconscious is running in the background, helping you make all those decisions, even when you don't realize
in the
it.
blink of an eye. That's right. So in that moment, I could tell you what kind of crowd they were going to be. Because if they all burst out laughing at seeing this guy in a G-string, and his ass hanging out, I would know that they're a little rowdy and we're ready to go. They're going to be like, we're going to hit the ground running with these guys. If you saw them all go, like
maybe
if they all pulled back,
they're warm them up.
If there was no reaction at all, you knew this was going to be a grind. You're going to have to get in there and get them because they weren't going to be giving it up. You're going to have to work for it tonight. Yeah. In that moment, I knew what kind of crowd they were going to be. So it's funny. Gosh, I don't even know if I can remember the joke anymore. I used to have this. I don't remember which joke it was. It's been so long. Early on, I had a barometer joke, and I would tell the joke, and how they reacted to that joke, I knew which way to go with the show. I think it was my Build-A-Bear joke. I don't remember. Maybe it was something else. I haven't told it in so long. Yeah. Whatever that joke was back then, I'd have to go through old set lists. Yeah. But in that moment, I could tell. And sometimes, so if you can tell if an audience wants to be you to be a little cleaner, they know if you want and a lot of times I believe that a crowd is smarter than I think they're genius.
For sure.
An audience knows better than anyone. And so in the moment of this crowd, if you tell a joke that's a little bit clever, they'll come up to that joke. And if you tell another one's a little clever, they'll come up to that joke. And over the course of an hour show, 45 minutes, however long you're doing as the comedian, they will come to you. They will be like, okay, so by the end of it, you can tell one of the smartest jokes in the world, and the audience is there for it because you kind of
built them up to
built them up.
Yeah.
To it. But
it'll go right over their head. If you tried to throw it out right at the start, it would zip right by them.
Maybe, but I believe perhaps it works better if they get into your rhythm.
Yes.
If they understand your sensibility. It's like if you watched a painter paint and you enjoyed his work, his style is going to be there. Like Jackson Pollock is a little bit simple for this analogy, but you go, oh, I like that painting, and then you can see their style throughout. So when I'm doing an hour, if an audience starts to pick up on what I'm doing, and my dad was very clever. He passed away in 2001, but he was so clever in his comedy that if there was a group of 10 people sitting around, he would make a joke, and he would say it deadpan, deliver the thought or idea. If you were paying attention, you'd realize that it was a deliberate joke. If you weren't, you would just think it was somebody making a statement. And so this new joke that I wrote, and I really hope that nobody has written this joke before because I like the joke a lot and it's brand new. The idea is that if you don't think there's a patriarchy, if you don't think that men rule the world, think of this. There was a woman who created a device that would help you retrieve your canned goods from the back of your cupboard or your pantry. You just turned it. Oh, look, there's my creamed corn. Hey, there's my soup. Did they call her Innovative Susan?
No.
Did they call her Inventor Susan? Like, no, a lazy Susan. Like, if Kevin would have invented that, they would have been like, hey, it's the creative Kevin.
Yeah, no shit.
So that joke to me, once people realize, I'm like, did they call her Innovative Susan? The audience has by then made the connection of Lazy Susan.
Exactly.
And then the entire thought or
and
idea.
It's funnier not to even say it. It's just to let them.
In my opinion, yes. And that's my style of comedy is to just set it up and let them take it most of the way. And so I didn't realize how much I enjoyed that style. Like that's really sums up my comedy.
Yeah.
And I love it when the audience starts putting it together themselves. And as they follow along in the adventure, they go, oh, okay, I think a little bit. And I, there's a silly joke where I go, I don't think I'd move to Saskatchewan because they don't do daylight savings time. And daylight savings time is the only night of the year I can make love for an hour and 3 minutes. And so there are pieces to that joke that you have to kind of cobble together yourself. They go, oh, daylight savings, an hour, roll the clocks forward, it'd be an hour and 3 minutes. There's the joke.
Yeah.
But it's really implied. And I believe that the audience is smart enough to put all that together themselves. I think they're smarter than I am. So.
Right. And I think there's so much there I wanted to jump on. I was just thinking I need more paper to write down all these things. There's a million areas I want to go down on there, but I agree. I think that style is very powerful, and I think it's not for everybody, right? That type of comedy. And I'm very curious. This might be an off the wall question. You might not even know it, but do you know of a comedian named Rick Glassman out of L.A.?
I don't think so.
So he does a very different style of comedy. It's nothing I've ever seen before, and I like to think I'm a big comedy fan. I've seen a lot of it, and it's in ways takes that to the extreme of you are either going to get it and this is going to be the funniest thing, or nobody's going to get it and everyone's going to have a bad time. And it's such a tightrope act that he walks, but he's so confident in himself that these jokes are funny. I know they're funny, and it just needs the right crowd. And he's starting to grow his own audience and getting to that point now. But you could tell, he's 15 years in. And when you hear other comics talk on podcasts about him, you can tell the difference of people that they understand what he's going for.
Yep.
But if they believe that it's okay, and it's very interesting to me. It sounds like it's similar to you, but just taken to the nth degree. Whereas you,
well, I mean, what I'm hearing there is he does what you do, but better.
No. It's so I don't even want to take a crack at explaining even what he does because it's so hard to explain.
Well, there's a great line, and Sam Kinison was the one who said it, as far as I know, and that is, you don't want 90% of the people to like you. You want 10% of the people to love you.
Yes.
And so when you talk about finding your own audience, the people like Anthony Jeselnik's fans or Doug Stanhope or their fans are fanatical. Like Doug Stanhope fans are fanatical. Jeselnik is, he's a little more mainstream, but the same type of, like, he's unapologetic in his vision for comedy. This is how I'm going to do it. It's going to be dark. It's going to be bordering on evil. It's going to be hilarious. And those guys do it masterfully.
Yeah.
There's, so I love it when people have conviction.
Yes.
For me, I think that the comedy that I enjoy the most is Doug Stanhope.
Oh yeah,
or Bill Burr.
Yeah,
and I think, like, there's the arc of Lenny Bruce, then on to Carlin's in there a little bit, but I'm talking people who are a little darker than Carlin was.
Yeah,
the Lenny Bruce into Pryor into, and then as it goes through, Doug Stanhope, Bill Hicks, of course. I think that they had a real message. That they made it funny.
Yeah.
And I'm always a little bit disappointed when a comedian thinks that they're just supposed to deliver a message, because I'm like, well, then go do TED Talks.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, your job is to get laughs.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. I listened to a Bill Burr. It was just a short interview the other day. And he's like, what do you think I'm doing up here? He's like, I know my job is to make you laugh.
Yeah.
I go up there to make you laugh. And when I see young comics who go up there just to shock or just to, here's my soapbox and I'm just going to shout my thoughts and ideas. It's like, you're not a fucking comedian then.
Yeah.
Like, you're a comedian when you get laughs. Now, can you be a storyteller comedian where you're not getting your laughs per minute aren't?
Yeah.
Well, somebody like K. Trevor Wilson is the greatest ever. Like Jim Jeffries' stories, he can go 2 or 3 minutes without a laugh. Generally doesn't. There's laughs throughout. But those comics, they land with such a wallop when they hit their punchlines that they're exceptional at what they do. I think I've always been a little disappointed when I see somebody who's just going to go up there and just do their own stream of consciousness. Yeah. Here's my thoughts and ideas. Now, that being said, I would love to get to the point when I could talk about how much I hate corporate greed. Yeah. Nothing disgusts me more. Nothing disappoints me more about humanity. There is nothing that I hate more than corporate greed. And the idea of airlines, for one, pre-COVID, they're like, let's charge them for fuel. Let's put on a fuel charge. Yeah. And they're like, okay, now let's charge them for luggage. What else can we charge them for? Let's take away all the pillows and the food. Let's charge them for food. Yeah. Okay. What else can we charge them for? Let's charge them to pick their seats. What else can we charge them for? Let's charge them to. And so I saw airline as really the epitome, the personification of corporate greed. Yeah. I hate that kind of greed. Now, they have shareholders to answer and a board of governors, board
you
of
can
directors.
see why they get to that point, but it doesn't make it any different.
Right. And I hate it.
Yeah.
Now, I would love one day to make my true contempt and disdain for corporate greed funny. Yes. So every now and then I'll get brave and I'll go, I'm going to go up and talk about how much I hate corporate greed tonight. And I'm like, ugh, I'll just tell the lazy Susan joke. Yeah. I pull the parachute and be like, oh, well, here's a joke about daylight savings time in Saskatchewan. Yeah. So I'm often a little bit disappointed in myself that I can't get closer to somebody like Stanhope, which will be the equivalent of being a basketball player and being disappointed you couldn't get closer to Michael Jordan. Exactly. Like, he's one of the best comedians in the history of the world. And so, I look at when somebody's doing it on that level and their conviction and how they, I'm like, son of a bitch, I got to be better at this. I'm a pretty good comedian, but there's I think you would aspire to the greatness of a Doug Stanhope, right. and I'm nowhere near that.
Right.
But I'm only 17 years in.
Yeah, but what Stanhope been doing it for 30 years now?
Yeah,
like,
he's so great.
I love Stanhope too. He's his own special. He's kind of another one of those comedians where you can try and find equivalents, but it's just it's one of a kind, right? And but I think in order to get there, kind of what you were speaking to in a roundabout way a little bit is just keeping the laughs and the comedy as the number one pillar. You can have a message, you can have anything else, you can have all these things, but it has to be below the comedy, right? And I think where you see that split with some comedians is when you have that, you need that conviction too. If you're going to get to a place where Stanhope is, you need to be able to have that fire and that conviction in what you think is funny and your idea of it, and you can't kowtow to anything else. And I think that is something that, and again, this is just from listening to other comedians talk about this, but was such a trap for so many years was the sitcoms, the things that I need to do what the guy before me did that got the sitcom, not what you think is funny, not what you hold as the apex of what humor is to you, and you start moving away from that. And it might only be, a couple degrees in here, a couple degrees there, but where you end up in the end is a very different place than where a Stanhope would end up. It doesn't compromise for anything. You could throw $1 million at him to compromise. You're not going to get through it, and it's so important for, if you want to aspire to greatness, to have that. And I think what's cool to me is I think it was a bit of a trap because you had to have such strong conviction and you had to fly in the face of everybody else that's saying this is the way forward. If you want to have success, you want to have the sitcom, this is the way forward. And you had to really buck that. But now there's so many great examples of people, starting it on their own, doing it on their own, right? Like Andrew Schultz, have you ever? Yeah. So like, I'm curious, and that was another question I wanted to ask you about, but he, in the last couple of years has, laid out a groundwork for a new way forward, right? That takes a lot of those traps that I was speaking to out of the equation and puts a lot more emphasis on yourself and your own accountability and your own effort level. And I think that it doesn't mean you have to take that path. You can still take the other path. You can take your own path. You can do a Stanhope and, blaze your own trail. But I just like seeing that there's more opportunities opening up, and the dependence on certain infrastructures and, I don't know what to call it, but just traditional systems that you had to follow if you wanted to be successful are kind of falling to the wayside, and they're still available if you want to take that route. But there's all these other routes now available, so you're not focused onto that one. Yeah,
and it's certainly, commercial success like a Rogan, but when, the radio show that I started 15 years ago at CJSR, that was a bit of a tribute to my dad, who had a weekly show in Fort St. John on Saturdays where he showcased local musicians.
Wow.
So I was so young at the time. I was like 3 years old. And I like vaguely remember him having a radio show. But then I saw Good Morning Vietnam, and I was like, I want a radio show.
Yeah.
And the reason that I wanted the radio show was to showcase other people.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a, obviously it's a bit of a gray area, but they believe that like this person was the first comedy podcast, right? Like this was the kind of like start of it all. And then of course Maron was probably the first one to really blow up, but there was, some other great ones in between them. I think the Ricky Gervais one was one of the early ones that really kind of blew up, which was hilarious. So my radio show predates the first podcast. Yeah. And I think it's hilarious when somebody's like, "Do you have a podcast?" I'm like, I've had a 2-hour weekly radio show for 14 years. I'm like, it's a podcast.
Yeah, pretty much.
And so, but my logic behind that was to showcase others that I'm a fan of. I want to introduce you all to people that I know about. And then when podcast became a thing, I really, really fought against putting mine online. I like the idea of just releasing it into the cosmos. Well, the purpose of this is, so when somebody like a Mark Maron who was really good at getting to the bottom of things. And he had, because he's so neurotic. And because he had so many problems with so many other comics that it was dramatic. There was a lot of drama. Like the first time he did a Bill Burr one, the first time he did, so when he's talking to these people that he had all these beefs with, this is an angry Jewish guy. Who was like, airing his dirty laundry.
And had a lot of anger at the world too. For exactly what we talked about earlier. His management and just the industry itself too. And like everybody talks about the overnight successes you see in comedy, it's usually been 20 years of work that you've put in to get there, right? And I think that you see that in a lot of comics where that it's hard to not let that resentment build.
Yeah. And so when I look at the process of I'm just going to do this thing, I'm going to put it out, and it's good, and eventually people start catching on.
Yeah.
And then it starts to catch fire. And so now Rogan gets paid $100 million for his show. But he really didn't want sponsors because he's like, I'm just going to do this.
Yeah, I just want to do what I enjoy.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm such a fan of people who champion other people. Yes. It was really like Foxworthy who made millionaires of Ron White, Bill Engvall, and Larry the Cable Guy. Like he put on this blue collar comedy tour and made millionaires of these people. Yes. I love the fact that that Fluffy, Gabriel Iglesias, I love the fact that he brings like 3 or 4 openers on the road with him. Like he doesn't just use one guy. Yeah. He takes a bunch of his buddies and tours with them.
And what I love is you see that spread too, because you see, just use a Joe Rogan, right? So Joe Rogan did that for Tom Segura, Ari Shaffir, Bert Kreischer, all these guys. And then you see them do the same thing with all these other guys, right? Even, and then they start bringing these other younger guys, and then they're absolute killers, right? Even Andrew Schultz with Gagnon and Akash Singh and all these, just amazing. So when Andrew Schultz came to the Horowitz here and played, and I got to see his crew that he's coming with him, you could see like, oh, these guys are the next guys that are about to break, right? And I think it's a different eye for a comic to hear, because you always hear on the podcast the last 6 years of being obsessed with comedy podcasts and just taking it as much as I can on as high speed as I can maintain it coming into my ears. Sure. You start to hear, you were hearing years and years ago that Theo Vaughn was going to blow up. He's like, you didn't hear any industry, any news about him, but you could hear the comedians talking like, oh, no, he's next. Oh, have you heard of her? Have you heard of her? And the comics know. Yeah. And it's so interesting to me that it's not being capitalized on. Like, how could I have seen that? And I could see people like a Brendan Schaub who saw that too and goes, I'm going to start a podcast with this guy because I can, all these people around me that have been in comedy for, 20 years plus are saying this guy's the next guy. Oh, I'm going to go on to this. And I thought, oh, that's easy. And you can, Brendan Schaub is probably one of the people in comedy that capitalizes monetarily on anything he can and spins that, which is great for him. It's maybe, I'm sure some people, and I know a lot of people look down on it, but why is nobody else doing it, right? There's money to be made with that if you listen to the right things, but nobody jumps on it.
Well, this is going to make me sound like I want to, I don't like people who are self-important, so it's going to forgive me for the next little. I have a pretty good business sense, and I really credit my parents for almost everything. So my parents would rehearse every day, every single day, except for Sunday, which would be a travel day. So they were a professional band. We toured with a band my whole life. So I watched them rehearse every day, and then I watched them mail out promo every day. Yeah. And then I watched them iron their clothes before every show. Monday to Saturday, they shined their boots, went on and put on a show. Didn't matter the day. It was showtime. And so I've always treated this that way. I wake up 8:15 every morning. I go to work. I'm at my computer figuring out a way to get on stage every night. Yeah. And I don't have kids and my bills are paid, knock on wood. And I'm very fortunate in that I'm not motivated by money. Right. I'm motivated by stage time. Right. And I can figure out how to get on stage 363 days a year. Yeah. And I have for 16 years. Yeah. So that's my motivation. So when you say, how are other people not, why aren't they monetizing this when it would be very easy for people to capitalize on this other stuff? So I made a promise to myself that I would never make a nickel off of anything that wasn't my performance. Right. I don't want any commission. Yeah. So now, that being said, I will say this. If I book somebody for a really good paying show, like if I put $2,000 in somebody's pocket, $2,500, and if I send somebody to a show, I sent this one comedian on a show that paid great, and he was going to kill it. He was very good. So I sent him on a show that was going to be great, and he said to me, if this is the one you're turning down, he's like, how big is the one you took? Yeah, exactly. He's like, this is amazing. And so I sent him on that. So what I say is if it's like probably above $1,500, I say to them, because I'm like, if you bought me a bottle of Crown Royal, I wouldn't complain. Yeah. So I like to keep my liquor cabinet stocked. Of course. But technically that would count as commission. So I kind of, I always want to be honest with myself. So I never want to. Now, the reason that I don't want that money, and a lot of comedians who book other comedians will take 15%, 20%, and they can. It's a finder's fee. It's a commission.
Yeah.
They're booking the gig. They're doing the contract. They have the contact who got the gig. They deserve that 20%. Right. They can absolutely have it. There's not a comedian in the world that would complain about, and for the listeners from America who might be tuned into this, in the U.S., the most an agent can take is 20%, or 10%, pardon me. So a manager can take 10%, an agent can take 10%, but legally they can't take more than that.
Right.
In Canada, there's no limit.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm. So most agencies in Canada take between 20 and 30%. Now they're bringing you the gig and they're doing a lot of the work, so whatever. But 25% is pretty standard. And so for another comedian, a lot of times you would take 15% or 20%. So I felt like because I have contacts that I've cultivated over, decade and a half of doing comedy, it will be very easy for me to take commission on those shows. So I've had a really good working relationship with the University of Alberta. So for 3 years, I booked their comedy shows. I sent them the opening acts, the headliners. Yeah. I handled the contracts. And I think that it was very easy for the comedians and for the directors of entertainment for the University of Alberta to work with me because I have no dog in the fight.
Yeah.
I'm like no skin in the game because
you want to see everyone succeed.
Well, if I took money, which I could take from those shows, if I took 20% on everything I booked for other comedians, I would make enough money to live year over year. I would not. Now, the reason that I don't want that commission is incredibly singular of focus. If I take that money, I will be less hungry to find gigs for myself.
Yeah.
That's the only reason.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to be a booker, an agent, a manager. I don't want any money from anybody else. I want to make my living off of my own comedy shows. And if I take commission off anybody else's, I will then not be as hungry to find my own gigs. That's why.
And it's, I'm so glad you said that because that's exactly where I want to take it. It's the why is so apparent. I think everybody thinks that if I don't talk about why I do things, nobody will know. And if the why is monetary, it comes across. It doesn't matter if you say it, right?
You feel it. There's an agenda.
And that's what's I've loved so much. My favorite people, whether it's comedians or non-comedians, right? Like a Joe Rogan, that he's smart and he makes his money, but he also is always putting his hand back. He's always trying to bring people on and he's always bringing people forward. And I love that, right? And there's some non-comedian podcasts. So that's something that was a huge piece of what I wanted to do with this podcast is my friends around me, who do I think needs to be seen, right? And so many times I ask people and they go, well, I have nothing to talk about. And I go, no, you do. Like, just trust me, come on, you'll have a good time, you'll enjoy it, but I think you have something to bring to the world because I see something in you and I want to spread that to other people. And that's such an important piece. And I made that kind of the same thing as eventually I do want to start making money with this podcast. And I gave myself a limit. I said, I'm going to do the first 50 episodes, just love of the game. I have so much fun. I'm never happier in my life when I'm sitting across from somebody having these conversations. It's the most enjoyable thing I do. And if I allow money into that equation, it's going to change that. And that's going to come across, right? So now it's finding that balance because now you need to value yourself and you need to move forward and to keep improving. You at a certain point, you have to have a monetary value attached to this, right? If you just did stand up for free, you'd run into some barriers, I'm sure, because you wouldn't be putting food on the table, right? Like
I agree, and I agree. I don't like it when somebody is dismissive of an honest thought and idea.
Exactly.
That is a real thought.
Yeah.
I never cared about the money because I don't have kids to look after.
Right.
I don't have a mortgage.
Right.
All of my so I agree with everything you're saying. When I see a comedian who now has real life responsibilities, car payment, mortgage payment, kids that they got to send to college. Yeah. You are absolutely right. I have had the luxury of never having to worry about it. And I had a day job for 5 years when I started doing comedy. And then I just got so busy with comedy that I had to quit my day job. And I never want to take credit for something that I don't deserve.
Right.
People go, it was so brave of you to quit your day job.
Yeah.
You took the leap.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I didn't. I was making more money doing comedy for 2.5 years before I quit my day job.
Yeah.
Like my day job paid well. I was making more than that doing comedy.
Yeah.
And so I think you're right in that you do have to worry about that one day, but you with a job that, that is allowing you to do this, you're like, I'm not motivated by money. I'm going to do the first 50. But if that ends up being 100, 200, 500, I could see you just becoming great at this thing and
Right.
becoming known because of you're a fan of the medium.
Yes.
And so I think it's funny to hear somebody, and when you were talking about your age with your sister, like I was 26 when I started comedy. And then for the first 5 years, I definitely didn't make any money doing comedy. And I was doing 400 shows a year. And so I was paying to go to Detroit and Ottawa and Seattle and blah, 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 Boston. And I was I was spending every penny I made in comedy and some from my day job to do this thing.
Right.
And so I think it's a very realistic statement to say eventually it has to start. But if you know.
And the deeper reason behind it is, it's not even the only reason I want to make this podcast start making money is because I want to put more time. But right now, I need to put a lot of time. My day job is not an easy job. It's not part-time. It's very intensive. It's very, like I have 50 employees. I have people that are dependent on me, and I have to put a lot of effort towards it. But I love this so much, and this is my real passion, that it's finding that balance where if ever I want to get to a point where I can put this as my number one priority, and right now work just has to be that priority, but my passion and my soul is here.
Yeah.
Right. But if I ever want that to switch, I need to live somehow. I need to have some sort of income. Right. So I need to find that balance. And that was kind of my thought process is, let's start with nothing. Just don't make any money. Don't concentrate on that. 50 episodes. I want you to start working on making money, because that's a skill too of how to monetize all that stuff. You have to work on that, right? Everything's a skill if you look at it the right way, and you can build upon it. But then until I want to make the leap to doing this full time, I want to take every dollar I make on the podcast and put it back into the upgrading cameras, tech, flying and get whatever that ends up being, and however much I can monetize that, I want to put it into that, because it's never about the money, and it's not about the money right now. I never want it to be about the money. If I knew that I would have enough to feed and supply my basic needs, I would do this forever. Like I could do this for free forever.
Yeah. And most people who pursue a passion, that's how they feel.
Exactly.
I get such a kick out of it when somebody asks the question, so how much do you make a year doing comedy? And I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But it's hilarious to me that you would ask that question of somebody. I'm like,
it's so not even on the table of it.
Yeah. I'm like, you do realize it's a bit rude, but if you want to talk about it, I'm okay with that. I get a kick out of it. So the pursuit of that passion, when you look at Mark Maron, it's nice that you have a bit of a roadmap into how to do this. And, it was really fun to listen to, the episode last night. So it's fun to me to hear somebody who's so passionate, but I also am somewhat, when I see somebody in their 20s talking about timelines, giving themselves, this is my deadline. Yeah. This is when I need to have this working by. And I'm always like, that's not a real thing.
Yeah. It's hard not to, though.
You have to. Yeah. You push yourself to be better.
Accountability.
You really, And so I'm not saying don't do that, but I also.
It's silly.
That's not the word I would use.
Yeah.
It's optimistic.
Yes.
So I never look at anybody who has a dream or a passion. And so I whenever I speak to kids, I often have I'll have to do a seminar or workshop for the youth, and I show them this 3-minute video, and it is, what if money were no object, right? So it's Alan Watts. It's 3 minutes long. Google, go to YouTube and go, what if money were no object, Alan Watts. And it talks about that exact thing. What would you do if money were no object? Yeah. And if you just loved horseback riding, if you loved woodworking, if you loved dancing, what would you do? And when people say exactly what you said, if this just paid my bills, I'd be the happiest person in the world. That's a thing. And that's a real thought, a real idea. And I think everybody would be happy, so happy. And it was Mike Wilmot, who's one of the best comedians in the world, a Canadian guy, he lives in the UK. Mike Wilmot quoting a jazz musician. And I wish that I knew the name of the jazz musician. If anybody could ever find who the author of this quote is, who said this, I would love that. And that is this: there are day people and there are night people. And day people work all day just to give their money to night people. And when I read that, I've incorporated that quote in a few different shows. And what it speaks to me is not day people and night people doesn't mean somebody who's like an entertainer works at night. It means people who do what they love as opposed to people who work to pay the bills, which is still, there's a lot of honor in that too. But at the same time, there's this thing where it's like, if you did your passion and people were paying you to do your passion, you're a night person. And I wish that for everyone, whether it's podcasting or comedy or woodworking, dancing, whatever it is. And so I love seeing somebody do this thing. It was so fun to have your sister putting you, under the spotlight a bit.
And it's so funny that you say that and you bring up my sister, because so what started, I guess, like I have so many, I probably told like the reason I started this podcast, I probably have 15 different stories of all these, and they're all little pieces of the truth, right? Of what all went into it. But it almost predating most of the ones I've said so far was a conversation with my sister. I had just moved out to Grand Prairie and I'd started that position doing in the bulk fuel business like my dad. I was 23 years old when I got into that position, fresh out of university. I'm quite confident in myself and I was confident in my abilities, but I kind of got thrown into the deep end. Figure this out, like, and which is the best way to learn. And it was great, but I was a little bit stressed. And I had come up to Edmonton for just a visit, and I was running with my sister actually in the River Valley here. And she said, and she could tell I was stressed, and I was kind of, venting to her. And she just said, what would you do if you could get paid, if money was no option? Exactly what you just said. She said, what would you do? And I said, I thought about it, and just off the top of my head, and this probably isn't even it. The answer almost doesn't matter. But what I said was, I would stream video games and I think that was the answer in my head, because I didn't feel confident saying podcast or I think even comedy. I think those probably would have been a more true answer if I was willing, but I think I wasn't even willing to do it. But it got that thought started in my head of, and then she said, and she goes, well, I think you could do it. I think you could do whatever you want. And it was actually very powerful and she, because like you said, she believes in me so much. And she was the older sister, and she was the smart one. She would get 95s and 100s, and I would get, still quite bright in high school, 85s, 90s, but I put in zero effort and she put in all the effort. And I think what I attributed as intelligence was effort. And I didn't realize as a kid, when you're growing up, you don't see that, but to see her, she was always the bright shining star, and I was kind of a little bit of a goofball, right? I was intelligent too, but she was a smart one, so I had to be something else. So I toned down a lot of the more intelligent side of myself too, and was more of the goofball in the dressing room, in the classroom, getting kicked out, the class clown kind of stuff, because that's that niche I fill. But for her to say, like, it doesn't matter what you want to do, you could do anything. It kind of got that bug started in my head. And then also when you talk about day people and night people, I think I love that analogy. And I think what was powerful for me to see was I had never really realized, because you go through life and there's so many pressures telling you that the only thing you can do is day people, right? Yeah. Night people is a pipe dream. Like you have to stumble, you have to be so lucky, you have to be, or have like just a crazy talent you're born with. And that's not a path you can take. You don't even think about that. You're going to be a day person, right? And that's everything you see. Then I start listening to podcasts and a lot of comedians, and they talk about this life that they have where they don't have to answer to anybody. They can make their own rules. They do what they love. They follow their passions, and it just calls out to you where, oh, I fucked up. Like this path that I've been on and I thought was my path isn't for me.
Yep.
And it's a lot of things at the same time. That's a scary realization. It's, what am I going to do about it? Can I do anything about it? You second guess yourself. Is those things I've been hearing my whole life of, that's not, that night people stuff is not for you. You're going to go to university. You're going to get a job. You're going to do these things. And it was powerful to realize that is even an opportunity. And kind of what I was talking about of seeing a different path for comedy of, you don't have to take the new faces in Montreal into your sitcom route. You can go Andrew Schultz. You can start putting clips up on YouTube and figure out, but almost on the same dynamic, it opened up my ideas of, oh, there's lots of paths out there. You just have to have the I don't know even what to call it, but something
be willing to put in the effort.
Yeah. But it's all comes down to effort. And I think that's such an important realization. I love podcasts so much and the forum so much because it gave so much to me in those realizations and in a million others, right? You listen to Joe Rogan for a couple of 1,000 hours and you're going to pick up a few things that change how you look at life, right? And that's just one example. Or, Pete Holmes and all these people that really impacted me.
Yeah. And it is, so I think that I didn't have those pressures.
Yeah.
So I was an okay student. Mm-hmm. Like I didn't graduate from university, but I was here for 6 years.
Good times.
Taking a BCom. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. Because my parents were professional entertainers, it didn't matter what I did as long as I was enjoying it and I really applied myself.
Right.
I really, really worked hard at whatever. And I am a middle child, so I always worked a little harder than everybody else because I wanted it. I had to do that in order to get attention. You know, there was a younger child and an older child, and they got all the attention, and I was just kind of the forgotten one. My parents were awesome.
Yeah.
But so I didn't have that expectation of I have to go to find a day job.
Yeah.
So you could be like, you want to be a comedian? Be a comedian. You want to be a musician? Be a musician. You want to work in the casino? Work in the casino.
Just work hard.
Just work hard. Just be great at it.
Yeah.
And don't
Become undeniable.
Become undeniable. And so to give like a kind of a God, I hate it when it sounds like you're stroking your own ego. So I wanted to be really good when I was a casino dealer. So when I learned the game of roulette, the casino let me come in an hour before the casino opened.
Yeah.
So I would show up an hour before it opened and I would get to practice roulette. So there weren't cash chips involved. If you've ever played roulette, they're just color chips and the chip value is based on when a person buys in. So there's no cash value to the chips that you would play roulette with until they're given a value when somebody buys in. So I could come in and I could practice for an hour before the casino opened. And then they would let me come in an hour after it closed. As they were closing everything down, I could go. And I did that for 3 months. 3 months every day. I was in there. And then the same thing happened when craps came in. I wanted to be a great craps dealer, so I would go in and practice. I would be in that practice room. 3 hours a day, 4 hours a day. And this was outside of my normal work hours. 3 hours a day in there practicing craps because I wanted to be great at it. Then when I started comedy, I had the same work ethic in that I wanted to be really good at it. Now, there's something that I did early on that really benefited me. There were 3 comedians who were better than I was. That they all started about a year before I did. But so I started in 2003. They all started in 2002 or 2001. They still are so talented. So talented.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I put those 3 comedians, they were roughly my age and they were my friends. I put those 3 comedians on every show I ever booked because they were better than me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm going to be as good as these guys. And I knew I could get so it looked like I was as good as them. Like if you put us all 4 of us on a stage together, it would look like I had the same level of talent. As an audience member, you'd have been like, but what the audience might not realize is I had to put in 3 times the work they did so that I could look as good.
Yeah.
And to this day, I've just decided no one's going to outwork me. I love it that much and I really want to be good at it. But I had 2 shows today. They're virtual shows. Yeah. And I had 2 shows today. The first show was magical. The stuff was falling into place. And everyone was like, this is hilarious. So it was a very fun show. The second show, I made a few errors where I'm like, God, I went the wrong direction with that. I should have, I know it. And so I'll listen to the show on the way home and be like, why did I say that? Or why did I do this? And I realize I have to do that in order to look as good as some of the best comedians because, there's guys, I mean, there's going across Canada. Yeah. There is, not just a Brent Butt who's one of the best in the world, but there's all these guys who people might not know about, like a Rob Pugh who's so brilliantly, naturally talented, and somebody like Erica Sigurdsson, and so there's all these comedians that I don't know if I could ever be as good as them, but if I put in 3 times the effort, week over week, year over year, people will be like, they're both pretty good, but I know. That they're better than I am. And I want to be as good as they are. It just takes way more work. And so that just get in and whatever it is, whether it's you're working in the casino, I know I can keep up with everybody. Yeah. My dad, one of the last songs my dad ever wrote was, I used to ride with the best and I was never that far behind. Yeah. And so that's the feeling I think you talked a little bit on the podcast with your sister about imposter syndrome.
Oh yeah.
And so I don't know too many people that feel like, so you can just be a stand-up comedian? Yeah. Like that's, you can just be a podcaster? I'm like, well, you can, but you got to be willing to work every single night of your life for 10 years and then do it and then repeat, and do it nonstop. And so I just wanted to be good at it so that I could get booked more because all I want to do is be on stage.
Be on stage.
And there was a line, Jerry Seinfeld said this, and I agree with it. With every fiber of my being, with every part of my soul. Somebody asked him, what advice would you give for a young comedian? And you could also apply it to podcasters. What advice would you give to a young comedian? And Jerry Seinfeld said, if you don't have to do it, don't do it. Yeah. And I don't know. I hope that resonates with people. If you're listening to this, if you find something that you never want to quit. If you just, this is the thing you want to do, then do that thing. You know, when I go do comedy, it's so funny. People gave me all kinds of credit this summer. So I came up with the Fire Pit Comedy Tour.
Yeah.
So they shut down clubs. And so at the end of April, they opened up outdoor gatherings. And so I'm like, well, if people are allowed outdoors, I'm doing comedy outdoors.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, it's so nice of you to bring laughter to people. And I would always stop every interview. I go, no. This is not altruistic. Yeah. This is the most selfish endeavor in the history of endeavors. I do comedy. I say things that I think are funny to me. And if the audience laughs at them, I keep them. And if the audience doesn't laugh at them, I try and rework them or I get rid of them. There is nothing in comedy that I do for the audience. There is not look, I know it seems like, oh, you made everybody laugh for an hour. Yeah, for fucking me. Yeah. Like this was all so I could stand on stage and be the center of attention for an hour.
Exactly.
And you have to listen like, okay. And so I had to stop and go, no. Don't give me credit for trying to bring joy to people. The joy that I find in my life is when I'm on stage doing this thing. And it's all I've done for the past 16 years. I have done nothing but this thing. And so I always stop. Whoa. Don't give me credit for this. Yeah. Don't act like I'm on this, journey to try and
achieve sainthood or something.
I just want everybody to listen to my stupid jokes for an hour.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought that was funny. And I had heard you mention that before. And that was something that I was curious, and I kind of wanted to ask you because I think it's funny that it can be looked at as selfishness, but it doesn't come across that way because of how apparent it is that it is the love of the game that is motivating, right? Yeah. And all that selfishness doesn't matter because it's selfishness for the right reasons, almost or not even the right reasons, because right or wrong doesn't even enter. It's pure reasons. It's not tainted by any sort of. It's hard to even put to words of kind of what I want to say about it, but
it really is pure in
passion.
The pursuit. It really is
passion.
And I like I said, I think that comedians are only above mimes. We're below everybody else. So you're right in that. My only agenda. I'm very blessed that I didn't have to be motivated by money. I think you can feel when somebody is, but at the same time. If there's somebody who has kids and a mortgage and they're a comedian, they have to worry about money. And I understand that. I respect that.
For sure.
So for me, I really was, the harder I work, the better I get, the more I get to work. The more I get to work, the harder I get to work, the more I get to do this thing. And so you're right in that even though it is standing on stage and telling your own words, your own thoughts, your ideas, it can be broken down to self-indulgence. Yeah. Look how self-indulgent this guy is. Yeah. But that's self-indulgent. The end result is laughter. Exactly. And I had a really hilarious podcast that I did once. It's not up anymore, I don't think. I think that the people no longer do the podcast and the website went down or whatever. It's one of my favorites. And it was why comedians aren't artists. And the entire podcast was about that. And so if you ever hear me do a podcast, I don't know why you'd listen to me more than once, but the idea of it is art. What I'm trying to do, I do want to be good at it so that people, and I'd love it to have a message about corporate greed, but it doesn't yet. Yeah. And I hope that if you see me a year from now, you go, oh, he did it. He made that funny. Yeah. Oh, that's great. So the reason that, it's like, okay, yes, you're right. It is for the right reasons in that it is just a passion to do comedy for the sake of doing comedy. There is not motivated by anything else. It's not, I had corporate comedy in Western Canada, supply and demand, economics 101. There's not a lot of comedians that can do an hour of clean comedy, CBC clean or church clean comedy. There's not a lot of them. Because of that, the price, and because there's a lot of demand come November, December, pre-COVID, in the before times. Yeah. Because of that, the prices you get paid well. And so when an agent calls me to book me, I've worked with some really good agencies they have great reputations. They've been around for decades. Let's say I get a call from this agent in Regina, and I've worked for him for a long time. So he calls me and goes, "Hey, are you free on this Thursday? The gig is in Edmonton." And I go, "Yep." And he goes, "Great." So he sends me the contract. Now I know where I have to be and what time. Yeah. I didn't even look at what the show paid because I'm like, oh, it's a gig on a Thursday in town. That's great. I never even thought about that.
Yeah.
And so right before I walk on stage, I go to look at the gig sheet because I need to know how much time I have to do.
Yeah.
Normally it's 60 minutes, but on a corporate show, sometimes it can be 45 to 60 minutes. So you know what you have to do contractually. And I look at the gig sheet and I was like, oh shit. I was like, it paid $1,000 more than I thought it did.
Yeah.
But I didn't even look at I didn't even look at what it paid because I was like, oh.
You were just excited about the stage time.
Yeah. That's all I wanted. Yeah. And Ryan Short, who's a very funny comedian, lives in Edmonton as well, but he's in Florida right now. But I started the Okanagan Comedy Festival, and it's a lot of work. And Ryan Short and I are sitting there one day, and he goes, "Why do you do this?" And I said, it was one of my favorite Ryan Short stories. I have a million favorite Ryan Short stories. And he goes, "Why do you do this?" And I go, "You want to guess?" And he goes, "Stage time." And I'm like, "Stage time." Exactly. And then he looked at me and goes, "There has to be an easier way."
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, he's great at keeping me in check when I take myself too seriously.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody needs that. Just not even whatever profession you have aside. That is a very important piece of success everywhere, of having people to check you and keep you from going too far off the deep end, and keep you honest. And again, I think I said this earlier, but I hope I don't offend you by how much I see my podcast journey through the lens of comedy, even though I've never stepped on stage. I feel like it's probably offensive to some people.
No, God, no. Anybody? No, I don't. So, no, because when we see somebody, like I'm a fucking part of this.
Head of the conglomerate.
Yeah. Dickhead. When people who do things passionately and for passionate reasons see somebody else who's pursuing a passion, I think that almost every one of them, especially the good ones, will... not only are they benefiting from it by getting a little bit of press from you, so people might go like, "Hey, I'll message." Like, if you want, by the way, I have a couple comedy CDs I send to people for free. Yeah. So just send me a message, Instagram and Twitter, extra Lars. I'll just Dropbox them to you.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, but anyway, when somebody sees that, they can hear it, they can see it. Your understanding of the comedy world is the depth and breadth of it because of the amount of you've consumed in the behind the scenes. Yeah. Now we think, because we're such fans of it and because we've listened to a lot of these podcasts, we think that everybody else also has that interest, but we don't realize they don't. Yeah. Like, I have a friend that loves a podcast about The Bachelor or loves this podcast. So this world that we're a part of is still really small in the grand scheme of things. It's not that big. When I see somebody who loves comedy that much, I love that feeling. This is all I want to talk about. This is, and it's so funny. I dated this really wonderful person for 3 years, and she was sometimes worried that on the road I was trying to pick somebody up. Well, I never picked up anybody on the road. I'm bad at it. I'm not overly handsome, but I never cared to. If you find me after a comedy show, you will find me almost 100% of the time the back talking comedy with the comics. Every time you can set your watch by it. Show ends, I'm somewhere talking about comedy with the comics, and I just love it so much. Yeah. And so I'm just trying to pick somebody up. I want to talk about this stupid thing. So when somebody's looking at you and your pursuit of this passion, I think that they're going to understand how much you want it, how much you love it. As far as going to the back of the start of the conversation, here's what I tell people who are thinking about trying stand-up comedy. So most people don't have your knowledge, but they go, "Hey, I've thought about trying stand-up comedy, and I'm too afraid. What if it doesn't go well?" And I go, "Okay, let's do this. What was the last professional comedy show you saw? Have you been to a live comedy show in a comedy club?" And they'll go, "Yes, I have." And I go, "Okay. Was the headliner funny?" "Yeah, it was great. Yeah, thought it was awesome. Great. Okay. What was his name?" And they go, "It was a guy from L.A.
He had eyes, he had hair. He wore two shoes. Fuck."
Yeah. And so I go, "So just to be clear, you watched a professional comedian for 45 minutes. Yeah. He made you laugh, probably has TV credits, and you don't remember their name."
Exactly.
And I go, "So you're going to go do 5 minutes or 3 minutes, depending on where you are in the world, your first time up. You're going to do 3 to 5 minutes on an open mic or an amateur night. And you think people are going to remember you?" Like, you got to let go of that ego. Yeah. There's no, and it's, when you talk about your reluctance to start this, where you're like, "I don't know, should I?" And you're like, once you do it, you're like, "Oh, this.
Why didn't I start this years ago?"
Right. And so when it comes to stand-up comedy, I tell people, like, look, Chris Rock's was so perfect. On Tambourine, one of Chris Rock's specials, he goes, before my kids leave the house, I always remind them, remember, nobody outside this house gives a fuck about you.
Yeah.
And he goes, I remind my kids that every day. Remember, nobody outside this house gives a fuck about you. And he goes, and half the people in the house are on the fence.
Oh, that's fucking great.
Yeah. So when somebody thinks about trying stand-up comedy, I have an email that I send them that'll give them all the basics.
Yeah.
About like, this is what you need to do to get started. Here's what you do. And you'll have most of this information anyway.
Yeah.
But that email, then you just sign up for an open mic and you go do it.
Exactly.
Because it's exactly like doing your first podcast where you're like, oh, okay. And when you go do that the first time, you're going to be in a club of people who have done stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
And that is, if it's something you've thought about and you're like, I've written, I can, because I've done this for a long time and I've run open mics for years and all kinds of shows. And when I see somebody show up 2 weeks in a row or 3 weeks in a row, so the third week, I walk over to the person and I go, there's a table of 3 guys once. And I walk over to him and I go, which one of you is thinking about trying stand-up? And the guy's like, I am.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know. That's why you've been here 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah.
Come in the back, sign your name up, or sign up for next week, get started. And I don't ever I want people to do it in their own time. Mm-hmm. But sometimes all you need is that little nudge of being like, look, there's room for you on the show tonight.
Yeah. Come
to a spot. And I say probably, I'm trying to think if there's anybody who's turned it down. I might have been one over the course of the whole time. They're like, okay, I'll do it. Yeah. They just needed somebody to come over and go, get over here, get in, get on stage, tell your 5 minutes of jokes.
And I think a lot of times it also requires you just to be honest with yourself. Because that was for me, is I was not honest with myself that it is something I want to try. I always thought like, no, that's not for me. Like my childhood was too good. I can never, right? Going back to the same thing we talked about, I always had that in my head of like, no, you need to have that trauma to be a comic to even try it, right? And I think that was great about seeing comics like Jeremiah Watkins and, Tom Segura to a small degree of that had pretty good upbringings, loved their family, all this stuff, and they still are amazing comedians, right? And it took that. But what changed it for me was my best friend Chase, he had brought up that he was writing down bits in his phone. And I don't know what took over me, but I got so obsessed with getting him to an open mic and getting him to try it. And at some point, and I was on him for weeks. You got to get there and try it. You're going to be so good. And he goes, are you sure you don't want to do this? And I'm like, oh, maybe you're right. I think it is. I was kind of, but I didn't even realize it until he flipped it on me and made it come back. I was like, oh shit, I think you're right. I think this is something that I really want to try. And then what I started to do, get my bits going to my phone, start to build it up. And, I made that decision there that I'm going to start, or I'm going to at least try. I'm going to try an open mic, like just, made a deal with myself. Obviously COVID threw kind of a wrench into that, but it's still on my list and I still know I'm going to do it. Right. And that was just one of those things where you don't even realize your own, I think it comes back to kind of that ego, and your ego does a lot of things to protect you. And it thinks like, oh, there's a lot of pain. And you've listened to thousands and thousands of hours of comedians talking about the pain of bombing and all that stuff that goes through and how much love you have to have for it to get through it. Like, are you sure you want to try this? And the answer was yes, but I think I was somehow insulating myself away from that to make sure I was ready, or I don't know what it was.
Yeah, that's normal.
Yeah.
I think that believing that we are more important than we are, like it goes back to like, I tell people who are thinking about trying it, I go, people in the audience care more about how their hair looks.
Yeah. Yeah.
They care more about their own
the girl that's on the date with you, what she thinks of you than what's going on. Unless you're a nut like me that's obsessed with it, right? Shushing, people are talking and going nuts because I want to see this. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's normal, to be like, I don't know. But I mean, the fear of like, oh, what if I'm not good at this? But as we go through life, hopefully people realize that doing something that you care about, doing something that you love. And I love it when I see somebody who they're like, I've been writing down jokes. And I'm like, I know. I can tell. Yeah. I was in Detroit once and these 2 young guys came up to me and they were like, hey, really enjoyed your show. And I go, you guys comics? I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, you can just tell. You can smell them. Yeah. But it's like, there really is this, most of the people who are comedians weren't the cool kids. Occasionally, one in a thousand, there are a couple people that were the cool kids. Chris DiStefano's of the world. Oh, dude, Chris was a good buddy of mine? No. Yeah, Chris. That's cool. My message Chris right now. Chrissy D. So when he came to Edmonton 5-6 years ago, I was opening the shows and we hung out all week. So every time he comes back, we hang out and he's like, this is Chris DiStefano's. He goes, how in Canada do you not have a strip club called Looney Poons? He's so right though. Oh, he's hilarious. So, I never go to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So I only like I'm not. I don't care to act. I never wanted a sitcom. I never wanted that. And I looked at the comics that I love the most. They were all from New York. So every year since 2007, I've gone to New York. And here's a bullshit story. It was a true story, but here's some more about me. In 2004, I win this amateur comedy competition in Alberta.
Right.
I send an email to Gotham Comedy Club.
Wow.
And I send them a link to me winning this competition. And the email said, could I have a spot in your club in 2007? Oh. And Gotham emailed me back. And they said, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So in July of 2007, I went, like, emailed them, hey, by the way, you said I could have a spot.
Yeah.
In 2007, it's 3 years later, I'm ready to come to New York. Can I have a spot? And they emailed back. They're like, yeah. And so there was funny. I watched the headliner. He was incredibly funny. Again, this is 2007.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about Chris first as I try and find this picture for you really quickly. So he was great. And then like a few years went by and I was like, oh, I never really thought about him or anything. And so I was showing somebody a picture of me having gone to New York in 2007. Yeah. And I was like, I looked at the marquee and when I looked at the marquee, I was like, oh, I'm like, it never even occurred to me who he was. So the person who opened the show in 2007,
Daniel Tosh?
It was Daniel Tosh.
Holy shit.
Yeah, but he wasn't anybody in 2007.
Exactly.
He was like, he was a super funny headliner, but
that's all he thought of it at that time.
Sure.
Oh, it's so funny.
And so I was like, oh shit, it was Daniel Tosh.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I go to New York and I've always, every summer I go to New York for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, every summer. And I want to go to New York the same way you wanted to start a podcast. I want to go to New York the same way you wanted. I'm like, I just love it so much.
Yeah.
So DeStefano and I hung out a couple times in New York. He's like, oh yeah. And so then I'm in Los Angeles because I did some shows in Vegas and I went to Los Angeles to surprise Ryan Short. He was going to be there and I picked him up at the airport. I was going to pick him up at the airport. I got stuck in traffic. But so I'm there. I get a text message from Chris DeStefano. And he's like, are you in Los Angeles? Because he saw on my social media. He's like, are you in Los Angeles? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm in LA right now. And I was like, oh, no way. I was like, do you want to do lunch? He's like, yeah, sure. So I went and saw him. He was working out a couple of bits. So I went and saw him at the Improv. I went and saw him at the Laugh Factory. Dude, if people don't know Chris DeStefano, look him up. He's one of the funniest human beings on the planet.
And if you want a good intro, go to YouTube right now and watch Chris DeStefano 9/11 story. It's he's from New York, born and bred, and it's his personal story of where he was on that day. It's one of the funniest 10-minute chunk maybe I've ever seen. Like it is, and it's on the anniversary of 9/11. He's probably 9 or 10 drinks deep when he tells it, which just gets him into the perfect Chrissy D loosey-goosey flow state, and he absolutely annihilates the story. And it is the perfect entry into who Chris DeStefano is. And then if you like that, History Hyenas is a podcast, and that's one of my favorites. I fucking love it.
Chris is great.
Yeah.
So we have lunch in LA, and then like a couple days later, I don't remember if it was after I got home, the girl I was dating at the time shows me an article. He was down there because they gave him a sitcom. So he had a sitcom, Chaz Palminteri. Well, yeah. So like he was getting a show developed around him.
Yeah.
And I was like, he didn't say shit about it. He never said a word.
Yeah.
We like hung out and he never once said, oh yeah, I'm here for meetings because I got a sitcom. Yeah. We just like joked around and I was like, why wouldn't you come? Like, congratulations, man. That's so great.
And just in how much I've, listened to his podcast and stuff, the reason he always talks about why he doesn't talk about it is because he calls himself Chrissy Pilots because he's had 6 pilots and he's never gone anywhere, so he doesn't talk about it to anybody anymore. Oh, I just love that, old Chrissy Pilots.
Yeah, but I think this would have been one of his first ones.
Oh, it probably was. Yeah, exactly.
Oh my God, he's such a nice guy. And like so funny and probably I'd say one of the top 5 best looking guys in comedy. Oh yeah. Like he's just so crazy. That's where when you said like usually the comics that make it up aren't the cool kids, but then you look at a guy like Chris and it's like, oh well maybe that's the one exception there. But
he played college ball.
Funny as he is nice. Like you hang around with him, like we took him to strip clubs in Edmonton or a strip club and he was like, well, how do you not have a Looney Tunes? And so every Christmas I sent him a picture of Canadian Tire Money. Because he's like, he saw Canadian Tire Money and he's like, a business can't just print their own currency. That's against the law.
Yeah.
He's like, this is like legal tender. He goes, you can't do that. like if you make your own currency, you go to jail.
Yeah.
And he joked about it the whole week, where he's just like, in Canada, you're like, let him.
Yeah,
like,
it's not hurting nobody. Yeah. It's nice, pretty colors.
Yeah, sure.
The kids love it.
Yeah, he's great. So he's so wonderfully funny. Oh my God, that dude's good at comedy. But yeah.
Yeah, and just hearing you talk about Gotham and LA and stuff, that's kind of something I wanted to ask you about, just because in listening to all these podcasts, you hear about these certain places, like the Comedy Store, like Gotham, like the Village Underground, like these meccas of comedy.
Oh, yeah.
And I always hear it in the framing of the U.S. And I'm curious, is there a Canadian equivalent? Is there...
No. There's open mics that are pretty legendary.
Oh,
so there was one in Vancouver for about 10 years called the Urban Well. It doesn't run anymore, but it was legendary.
Yeah.
Comedy Monday Night in Calgary has been going for 15 years.
Wow.
Legendary room. There was one in Toronto, truly legendary. Truly legendary. It was called Spirits. And Spirits and the Rivoli. So the Rivoli, they've been like, Spirits was around for, I think, close to 20 years. And the Joanna Downey was the name of the person who ran it. She actually passed away from Lou Gehrig's disease. But Joanna Downey was so wonderful. Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
This is, have you ever heard of Michael Lair? Yeah. So this is Michael Lair. Sure. He's one of my... He's an absolute inspiration. Yeah. He has Lou Gehrig's, and he's still doing comedy and milking it for every fucking drop that is in there, and it's some of the purest comedy, just almost not even just purest humor that I've ever seen, and he's just so special and so amazing. He's actually said yes to coming on this podcast, and I've been a fucking pussy, and I never followed up on it. I need to, and I love him so much, but I almost psyched myself out of it. Of just when he said yes, I did, because I was watching an Instagram live video. Sorry to interrupt your story. It just kind of popped up just when you said Lou Gehrig's.
Yeah.
And I just popped on to he's always doing funny shit, even if he's on the street, he just lives life to the fullest, just wants to bring, laughs to people and probably inside very selfishly, like you said. Yep. But, and he comes in, he's just chirping the podcast and stuff, and I love it, right? I'm all there for it, and my parents were all around me, so they're laughing. They see me just log onto this live, and then this guy's tearing me apart. This guy, he's in a wheelchair. It's hard to understand him, right? He's battling this disease, and he's just tearing me to shreds, and I'm laughing. They're all like, "Are you sure? Okay?" They know I care a lot about the podcast, and seeing this guy rip into it, I'm like, "No, this is perfect. That's exactly."
When they're busting your balls.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want from him. And then the next day, I hop on again, and VonDubCast is back here, and he said something again. So my mom goes, reach out to him, see if that's so whatever. Okay, my mom said I'm going to reach out, so I asked him and he said yes, and I just, clammed up and probably overreacted, and I think I was like, are you serious? Like, would you? He's like, well, maybe if you calm the fuck down. I was like, oh my God, I just, like you listen to all these podcasts, you think you're all cool in the scene, and then you get your first opportunity, you fanboy out and fucking make a fool of yourself. So I definitely still have to have him on, but sorry, you were going there, you were talking about some other ones.
Yeah, so the room. So Joanna Downey, she ran Spirits. Spirits was probably, I want to say, the most legendary. So the Toronto Yuck Yucks was the first real comedy club in Canada, or one of them, I believe it was 76, if my memory serves me correctly. But it's moved locations.
Oh, okay.
So they called it the Super Club in Toronto, but it's had multiple locations, and it might be moving again. It's been in its current location, I think, for over 10 years. So there's comedy clubs. There was what was Yuck Yucks in Vancouver, which became the Comedy Mix, which shut down. Absolute in Ottawa is regarded as the hottest comedy club in Canada. It is bonkers. Wow. Rumors Comedy Club in Winnipeg.
Yeah, I've heard some good things there.
So I would say, as far as legendary rooms, Rumors Comedy Club in Winnipeg has probably been around the longest in Canada.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that. Great club. They know how to run a club. Yeah. It is awesome. So Rumors Comedy Club, and then the Comic Strip, really regarded as one of the A rooms in Canada, certainly, if not the A room. And then the Laugh Shop in Calgary, which was a Yuck Yucks, so it's been around for over 25 years. But they don't have the same draw so the lineup shows. So when you go to somebody like the Cellar, if you go to the Comedy Cellar, if you go to the store, you're going to see lineups, and that's where
Straight Killers there's.
Yeah, it's not just that; it's the fact that that's where those comedians live. So that's where
it's home base.
It's home base, and so you're going to see a real lineup. So when you go to a comedy club in Canada, you're going to see the headliner for that week. Yeah, and they're going to be. It's possible that you get a really awesome lineup, but there's not the same kind of draw, whereas Spirits in Toronto did have that draw.
Oh.
Like when Robin Williams was in town, Robin Williams dropped in. When somebody famous was in town on a Wednesday, they went to Spirits. And I'm like 99% sure it was a Wednesday. It might be Tuesday. Anyway, I hope I get that right. But I got to play it a couple times. And Joanna Downey, I met her when she toured out this way, and I became friends with her. And so she was awesome. I hope that everybody. I can't believe she's gone. Like, it's very and there's a lot of people who knew her way better than I did. But the last conversation I had with her, I don't know if she'd been diagnosed yet, but we were drinking after a show at Spirits, and she was talking about how she committed, over a decade to Spirits. Like she was the one who ran the room, and she didn't feel like she toured as much as she could have because she put in a lot of time and effort to this room. And I said to her, I showed her the end to Mr. Holland's Opus. And at the end of Mr. Holland's Opus, if you haven't seen it, by the way, spoiler, I apologize. It's a fantastic movie. But at the end of it, sorry, I'm ruining the end for everybody.
Yeah, well.
So at the end of it, one of the people speaking says, like, he taught for, 30 years, and they go, all these students that he taught, she goes, we are your opus.
Yeah.
We are the symphony of your life. And I said to Joanna Downey, I go, you've given opportunities to so many people. You were the one who, and she ran another room, and she launched so many people that went on to great things. And I go, even though maybe you didn't achieve the greatness that you thought you wanted to as a comedian, you don't realize the impact you've had, the ripple effect that Joanna Downey had until the end of time. Like she is a part of the fabric. If you asked, what do you think the most legendary comedy night? And you'd have to say night, not room or club. If you ask the next, and it'd be a fun experiment, what is the most legendary comedy night in Canadian history?
Yeah.
I bet you almost 100% of them would say Spirits in Toronto.
Cool.
Yeah, really. Comedy Monday Night in Western Canada, certainly, like James Moore.
Yeah.
And he's just one of the most diamond human beings you'll ever meet in your life. That's also quite legendary. But as far as somewhere that like the Cellar, like Gotham or something like that, you just want to have the same people dropping in. There's a funny story that Mitch Fattel told me. Mitch Fattel is very funny. So Mitch, he's headlining Gotham.
Yeah.
And the manager owner comes over to him, and it's like, you've been bumped. And he's like, bumped?
By who?
I'm the headliner.
Yeah.
Like, you're bumping the headliner? Like, you can put other people on the show, but I'm bumped.
Yeah.
And he's like, Robin Williams and Jerry Seinfeld just came in and they want your time.
All right, I guess I bumped.
And so the headliner would still get paid, but you wouldn't get to do the show. It's like, no, just Robin Williams and Jerry Seinfeld?
Yeah.
Okay, I guess.
I guess I can take one for the team on that, hey? Oh, that's funny. Yeah. And I'm glad how you answered that question, because it kind of rolls into the next question I had. So in listening to lots of these podcasts and learning about these different comedy scenes, it seems like for a scene to be successful, it takes one person to really be the fire surrounding it. I've heard, her name is escaping, but somebody in Denver that really got the Denver, I think she's the one that runs the Denver Comedy Works and just really created the scene. There was somebody that, I can't remember the name of the person, but in Texas where Sam Kinison and a bunch of others came up. In Houston, And it seems like there's always one person in these scenes that really cultivates and is there. And not to put you on the spot, but it seems like from a lot of people I've talked to when I knew I was going to have you on, it seems like you fill that role in Edmonton a lot. Is that something that you realize in yourself? Is that something you try not to think about?
Wholeheartedly disagree.
Yeah?
Wholeheartedly disagree.
Would you say there's somebody else in Edmonton that fills that role, or do you think it's more of a collective?
I think so. If somebody were to be a real important cog in a wheel.
Right.
And it's funny because there's a lot of young comics who are like, Lars was my mentor, and I always stop them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, the reason that I don't care for the term mentor, I'd never have, is because that implies that I'm the coach.
Right.
I'm not the coach of the football team. Mm-hmm. I'm not the coach of the basketball team. Yeah. I'm the star quarterback.
You're the star, yeah.
I'm in the game.
Right.
Like, if we're in a competition together, it's a comedy competition.
Of course.
And I'm going to beat you. Like, so it's a very nice compliment. they're like the reason that I don't I was the one who started the amateur night at the comic strip, but it was based on stage time.
Right.
Because I got to book a show. I got stage time. So the manager, Dino, one of my favorite people in my whole comedy career, if not my life, Dino came up to me one day and he's like, so they had Tuesdays, the comic strip did Alternative Tuesdays, which was often hypnosis. Sometimes it was a stunt show, but they did hypnosis.
Yeah.
Then it was Improv Wednesdays. So they would do improv every Wednesday.
Yeah.
And then Thursday through Sunday was the headliner, but they were dark on Monday. So I worked for the club for about a year, and then the manager pulled me aside, and he's like, hey, how would you feel about starting amateur night here on Mondays? And I'm like, I'm in.
Yeah.
And for about 3.5 years, I ran Hit or Miss Mondays at the comic strip. So I did the scheduling. Everybody got a spot about every other month because there was so many amateurs. Yeah. And I literally just had a spreadsheet. I would just take all the names, and I would just cut them and then just move them into the next month. So you were always like one every other month because there were 8 spots per night, 4 nights, 32 spots a month, and there was about 60 comedians.
Right.
So I would just take the names, and when a new name came in, I would just throw them on there.
The mix.
If you removed me from that equation, somebody else runs that comedy night.
Right.
There's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah.
So because there was so much interest in performing at the comic strip, and there was almost no stage time on Sundays, I started an open mic on Sundays, kind of at first by accident, but because it was hard to get stage time on Sundays.
Yeah.
So I started, I took over running one. So a comedian started one at the Lion's Head pub on the south side of Edmonton. So he started one there on a Sunday night. And after like 2 weeks, he stopped showing up. He'd become a teacher and he just school started and he just stopped showing up. So we took it over. So for about a year, we just alternated who emceed that. That one ended. And then the Druid approached me and said, how would you feel about doing comedy night here on Sundays? A very wonderful guy named Todd. And so Todd asked me, and I was like, I don't know, man. I just finished this other one. It was a pain in the ass, so I don't know. And he's like, no, let's. So I sat down with the owner. And it became the longest running open mic in the history of Edmonton.
Wow. And
I made it a show up, go up, outside of a comedy club. An open mic in a non-comedy club. So the amateur night at Yuck Yucks ran for like 20 years. Amateur night ran. So I never want to misrepresent what it was. It was an open mic in a bar. And so it was like it's the longest running one ever.
Wow.
And so I allowed everybody to, you show up, you get 5 minutes. You show up, you get 5 minutes. And when people would be like, hey, I didn't get a spot at the comic strip this month. And I would go, well, there's a spot on Sunday.
Yeah.
And they go, oh, well, I want to perform at the comic strip. I'm like, oh, so this is just a hobby for you then?
Yeah.
It's not about stage time. You just want to tell your friends you're performing at a comedy club? Because you get a spot every other month. That's the rotation. That's just how it is. And so running that, I think if you remove me, I gave a lot of stage time, but I hosted the show every week because there was no stage time on Sundays. So I hosted it every week because I wanted stage time. And if you take me out of that equation, it doesn't change anything in the landscape of Edmonton comedy.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of young comics who I took on the road for the first time, but it goes back to when you see somebody who has talent, like everybody talking about Theo Von. It's not hard to spot talent. They're funny and they're working hard. Yeah. This is going to come together. It's going to pay off. And so when Sterling Scott started comedy, I was like, oh, this kid's busting his ass. He's working really hard and he has a wonderful sense of humor. So I took him on the road because he was working hard and he was funny. Yeah. And so I took him on the road. So there was like a generation of comedians who I took on the road for the first time, but I was the only person who was like headlining. So there's so many great headliners in Edmonton, but they weren't out at the open mics. Like they didn't run open. Right. They weren't at the comic strip on a Monday.
They weren't there to see the talent that was the next rising star.
That's precisely it. So to this day, I still get phone calls from people who are like, hey, I need an opener. And I could recommend who the next funny person was. Yeah. It's not hard to spot them. So I gave people a lot of opportunities, but I needed an opening act, and they were a hardworking, aspiring comedian. So I took them on the road. And somebody like Sterling, I took him on the road for about a year and a half, and then he became his own headliner. And then the next, Drew Bain comes along, and and then he becomes his own headliner. And then Alex Fortin comes along and becomes his own headliner. Ryan Short comes along, becomes his own headliner. So all of these comics that I worked with, if you remove me from the equation, it changes nothing.
They would have found their way. They were doing it on their own.
They were busting their butt. Every young comic, from Celeste Lampa to Cindy Rivers, to all these young comics. If you remove me, it changes nothing.
Right.
And did they learn some of the basics? Like there's some fun things. Like when you're a headliner, if you're taking somebody on the road, you're not obligated. It's an unwritten rule in comedy. You buy your opening act a meal.
Yeah.
But it can be a lunch. Yeah. Don't cheap out, but usually it's a dinner. You buy them a dinner. So that got passed down to the next, somebody passed that down to me.
Yeah.
Like the people who were before me, who took me on the road, like, Andrew Gross, Paul Sveen, Rick Bronson. I probably opened for Rick Bronson more than 100 times.
Rick Bronson.
Oh, yeah. Murdered. Oh, he was killed so hard. And so all these guys who taught me the etiquette of being a headliner and taking a young comic on the road, so many little things I learned. And I just passed that to the next group, the Scott Belfords and all these young comics. But there was no, like, I don't think I changed anything.
Yeah.
I gave them opportunities, and I had the ability to get them into some showcases, but I had nothing to do with the work they put in. I had nothing to do with their talent. I got them an opportunity, but we all in all of this, we all get each other opportunities, whether if somebody wants a job and you know them and they're a good driver or what, give them a shot. And so there's a funny line on the Chris Rock album, one of the earlier ones, when he's talking about like, Clinton gets Monica Lewinsky a job and he's like, 80% of the people in this room have a job because somebody recommended them. Yeah. Like that's how it works. Yeah. And so I've been around the longest. Also, I was talking to a very funny comedian named Corey Harding. So he called me and he's got a project he's working on yesterday. And he's like, how are things going with your season? And I'm like, well, I'm pretty lucky that these virtual shows have all come in. I go, but the reason that I have all this opportunity in Edmonton is because I'm the only fucking idiot who hasn't left. Like when you watch the movie Bull Durham, Crash Davis, Kevin Costner's character, he hits the most home runs in the minor leagues, which is almost a terrible record to have. Yeah. That means you spent all of these years toiling in the minor leagues. And so, I had a very, very funny DJ in talk radio DJ in Winnipeg. And she's like, in a tweet, you said you were the Crash Davis of Edmonton. What did you mean by that? Yeah. And it was so funny because the comedy club manager, Tyler, he's like, just so you know, she's going to go years back in your tweets, find something and ask you about it. And it's going to put you on the spot. I'm like, nah, it's like, she's not going to find anything. Yeah. She finds this Crash Davis tweet and I'm like, oh shit. Awesome. Just got me brilliantly. Just so great. She's doing talk radio in Ottawa now. Oh God, she's so talented. And so I look at, when Joan Rivers was coming through, she asked for me, Bob Saget, because I was the only one who's been around for 17 years in Edmonton. Paul Meyerhog moved to England and Rob Pugh has moved away and all of the people who, Ryan Belleville who's in Calgary, like Trent McClelland who's on This Hour's 22 Minutes, all the people who were of my class, there's like one left other than me. Everyone else moved on to Toronto, Vancouver, New York, LA, everyone else left. And so I look at my career and the opportunities that I've had, and a lot of times I'm like, ugh, because yes, I've been incredibly blessed, but I should have left Edmonton a long time ago.
And have you put a lot of thought into why that is? Is it love of the city? Is it just your fandom of the Oilers?
So I think that it's the same reason that you waited to start a podcast. It's a little bit of fear. Yeah. Now, I never want to make excuses. I want to be honest with myself. Yeah.
It's the hardest person to be honest with.
Oh, yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah. So, in 2007 when I went there for the first time, then 2008. So 2009 was the first time I was like going to move there. Okay. And I took the girl I was dating at the time. We've been together for a few years. So I took her to New York for a week to be like this is
what do you think?
This is where we're coming. Yeah. Like, let's start looking for a place. And I remember like 2010, she's like, just so you know, I'm never going to New York. Too far away from my family. I have no reason to be there. And I was like, oh. And so in my head, I was telling myself that I was waiting for her till, like, hey, once you're finished school, let's move to New York. And then there's been multiple opportunities. And I'm like, well, I'm on the road 40 weeks a year. So I'm like, where does it matter where I live? Yeah. But truthfully, it's been New York since the beginning. Yeah. Since 2004, that's been the place. And so I look at my incredible amount of opportunities I've had, how blessed I've been, how lucky I've been. I've been around the world, worked 25, 26 different countries. I've been the luckiest person in the world. But if people say you're the champion of Edmonton. Like, hey, so I asked a lot of people and they said you were the biggest comedian in Edmonton. I'm like, that would be the equivalent of hitting the most home runs in the minor leagues.
Exactly. Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, it's sad.
Full circle.
It's fucking depressing as shit.
I don't know.
I love Edmonton.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something about Edmonton that most people wouldn't realize. So I play a game sometimes when somebody's like, I don't know, should I move to Toronto or Vancouver? Like, wherever you want to go.
Yeah.
Do go with what feels right. So I go, if you were to put Edmonton as a city in the U.S., where do you think it would fall in the number of cities? And so now a lot of this particular search is a little biased in that they might not include suburbs. So Phoenix might not include,
Scottsdale,
right? So
Maricopa and Mesa,
that's right.
And all that.
Exactly. So even though that entire area, there's going to be like 12 million people, Phoenix population in and of itself. So when somebody's like, I want to move from Edmonton, I'm like, well, you do realize Edmonton's a major metropolitan area.
Yeah.
We don't think of ourselves that way. So top 10 cities in the U.S. by population, by pop. So here's just I'm going to read the list. So it goes New York 8.6 million, right? Los Angeles 4 million, Chicago 2.6 million, Houston 2.3 million, Phoenix 1.7 million, Philadelphia 1.5 million, San Antonio. And so again, people could just Google this themselves. But I'll tell you the point of this is, so once you get to number 7 on the list, San Antonio 1.5, San Diego 1.4, Dallas 1.3, San Jose, California 1 million.
Yeah.
So
that's Edmonton.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are in, if you took Edmonton as a city and you put it in the U.S., I ask people, like, what do you think the population of New Orleans is?
Yeah.
And they'll be like, I don't know, like 2 million.
Yeah.
What do you think the population of Baltimore is? They're like, I don't know. And you're like,
I would
450,000.
Yeah. I would have never guessed that.
Right. So Edmonton, I love the fact that Edmontonians don't think of themselves that way, because you can almost be the pretty girl who doesn't think she's pretty.
Exactly.
For lack of a better analogy.
Yeah.
So if you're the guy who wasn't good looking and then became good looking, you have more personality. So we don't take ourselves too seriously because we don't think of ourselves as a major metropolitan area. But again, the statistics are a little skewed in that they don't include the communities that are attached. So I want people to know that I understand.
Yeah.
But Edmonton would be one of the top 10 cities by size in the United States of America. And so there's
opportunity there. People just, because they have a different view of it, they instead of how do I take advantage of the opportunity that is here, it's let's go to somewhere where I've been told that the opportunity lies, right?
Yeah. And Drew Bame has a really funny line where somebody's like, hey, did you hear so-and-so moved to Toronto? And he's like, yeah, you can just do that. Yeah, like, that's not a credit.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You're like, oh, this person moved to LA. Yeah, wow. You can just move to LA. Like, all you need is a passport, you know? But anyway, I think that I'm giving myself a bit of an out where I don't think I deserve one in that, last year I went to New York for about 6 weeks. So it's always gotten a little longer, a little longer. And eventually that's where it has to be. And so if you are the person who was the connector in Edmonton, if you looked at the logic behind it, you're like, oh, you're just the only one who didn't leave.
Right. And it's funny that New York is the place, because from what I've heard, and just again, this is just from what I've gathered from listening to a lot of podcasts, it's one of two places. It's LA or it's New York. And it seems like it's very telling which of those places is that place for the person, that mecca. And it's very much is, if you're going to New York, you want to be the best stand-up comedian, and nothing else enters the equation. It's all about stand-up comedy. Whereas LA, you can still be that, but it's, I want to be a stand-up. I want to have a podcast. I want to have a TV show, maybe this. I want to be able to do everything. Yeah. And it's not that one is better than the other. It's just, it says a lot about the person and how they think of comedy almost. Yeah. And it's interesting to hear that. And, I think if you hadn't mentioned anything about New York, and just from what we've talked about, I think I would have guessed that from you, of just from everything else you said. If I was to guess, and you said like, oh, there's a city in the States that I want to move to take the next step in my comedy career, I would have guessed New York just because of that. And I find that so interesting that has those connotations, and there's so much more that goes into it. And I feel like if you were a peripheral comedy fan, you wouldn't even be aware of that.
Yeah. And so I don't know. I talked about this a few times on different podcasts, but this really made me laugh. So there's she did a podcast for a while. Really enjoyed it. She's running all kinds of festivals now. So if people are on social media, look up Savannah Harvey. Okay, so no H on the end of Savannah, so Savannah Harvey. Mm-hmm. Follow her on Instagram. Tell her you heard her on the podcast because I'm a favorite. So Savannah and her vocabulary, her vernacular is spectacular. Yeah. Anybody who's intelligent, I just want to listen to them talk. It's like it really is like singing to me when somebody can. Yeah, like just I'm just like
I couldn't agree more.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. So beautiful. I sound like I'm like compared to her.
Yeah.
So. We're watching. We happen to be watching Last Comic Standing when they redid it. So they did a reboot of it, and I explained to her this. I go, okay, an LA comic is often somebody who's taken a lot of acting classes, a lot of improv classes. Mm-hmm. They're very like big. They're large. Their movements are large, and they're acting everything out. I go, a New York comic stands at the microphone and just delivers murderous lines. Yeah. Just stands there and it's just a killer. And so I told her that's all the information I gave her. So a lot of times, LA comic will be very acty-outy.
Yeah.
A New York comic is just going to stand there and like just eviscerate with words.
Yeah.
So we're watching, and so then a comedian would come on and do their 3 minutes, and then she would have to say whether they were from New York or LA.
Yeah.
And she would go, New York, LA, New York, LA, LA, New York, LA, LA, LA. So we did however many comics they showed in one episode, 30, 40. She went 40 for 40.
Wow.
She went she batted 1,000 awesome. I think there was one comic who was like from Boston or from Houston. Like, so, other than that, every single one of them she got right. And so it is for me, when I saw somebody like Patrice O'Neill, who just stood there and just talked, when I saw somebody like Mitch Fatel, who just stood there and delivered incredible lines. Like, if you're not familiar with Mitch Fatel, some of his albums are some of the funniest albums I've ever, and like ridiculous, so funny.
Yeah.
So Mitch is fantastic. So when I was at the comic strip, we would get one comic from LA, one comic from New York, one comic from LA, one comic from New York, and almost every other week. And I was hosting all these shows, and I would work with, like, when I would work with a comic from New York, I'm like, oh, this guy is like an assassin.
Yeah.
And then I work with a comic from LA, and I'd be like, they're a little bit for me, it's just,
some are better, some are worse, some are.
Well, for me, it was like the idea that they were like overselling everything. Not all LA comics. Like, there's so many fantastic comics from around the world. It doesn't, and so, but for me, my money was on the guys who just stood there and just delivered lines, and I was just like, these guys are like murderers, and so. You
don't need to be agile when you got a flamethrower. You just stand and let the baby buck.
Yeah. And so I became a fan of that. And even then in 2000, I'm like, well, if New York is where I want to go to be great at this. And when I think that there's this neat thing that takes place in Manhattan. So you can do a lot of shows in New York and you can bounce around. And because LA has it a bit too, but New York, because it's such a tourist capital, every audience in all the comedy shows that you do in Manhattan will have people from Sweden and England and Canada and New Zealand and Australia. So your jokes kind of have to be able to play to everybody. So you're speaking to this very international audience all the time.
Right.
So your jokes really travel well. I was talking to some friends who own the Crack House Comedy Club in Kuala Lumpur reached out to me. They're like, we're teaching a comedy class. Would you like basically facilitate one of our comedy classes so the comedians are all going to do 5 minutes of comedy and then you're going to break down their comedy? And so there's a great quote, like, dissecting comedy is a lot like dissecting a frog. This is just a comedy saying. Dissecting comedy is a lot like dissecting a frog. It's not funny. It kills the frog.
Yeah.
So these comedians, again, it was their like first real show. So they would do like 5 minutes or whatever. And a few of them had some really, really good jokes. And then some of them I'm like, I see what you're doing in that you're making local references that everybody else knows about.
Yeah.
But I go, being from Canada, not that like you're going to play to local audiences most of the time, but if you ever reach a point where you want to travel, your act won't travel.
Exactly.
And there was this great, there's a CD, it's called 9 Sweaters by Andy Daly. It's so funny. So what this comedian did was he went and bought 9 sweaters at like a like whatever.
Goodwill or something, yeah.
And then he built a character around each, and he recorded a CD about each character.
Nice.
And one of the characters was a comedian who's doing he's only ever worked in LA, and he's doing his first ever cross-country tour.
Yeah.
And so he did 9 minutes, and he's like, oh, man, that's so hard. That's trying to make a left on La Brea and Rush Hour. So he did nothing but make like local references. And it was such a funny character. But sometimes those comedians who just murder when they're like, watch a comedian who is from Saskatoon, just murder in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
But you're like, none of those jokes would travel.
Yeah.
And when I started out in comedy, I knew early on that I wanted my jokes to travel, so I didn't develop stuff about White Avenue or the North Side or Clairview. I'm like, what? Like, no one's going to know what I'm talking about.
Cheat codes.
A little bit, yeah. So I instead I talk about the Lazy Susan.
Exactly.
Pretty hard hitting.
Evergreen, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's so funny that you say that, because for a long time, it was, if you're going to be that killer, like the prototypical stand-up comic that we're talking about, you're going to go to New York, and that's where all those guys are going to come out of. And I think a big piece of that is exactly what you're talking about, those crowds, and you're not falling into those traps that are so apparent when you're playing to those same audience every time. But then when Rogan went back to the Comedy Store and it blew up, and it became that destination where they're talking about, it's people travel from the world to go there to see it, and it became that New York audience in there. Only, I'd probably say and again, I'm not a comic, I'm just guessing, but from what I heard, it seems like it was only in the last 4 or 5 years where it really hit that peak, and it was that. And then you start to see that same type of killer comedy start to come back out of LA with these guys, you know, like Bill Burr and stuff, like just absolutely samurai.
Well, but Bill Burr, like when people reference those people,
Boston,
but he was in New York, for most
Boston,
of it,
New York, and we could sit here for the rest of the podcast and just name those people that took that same trajectory, that Boston, New York, LA, right? Like like Norton and all those guys that came out of there, right? Like Patrice, he was Boston too, right? Like,
but he never left New York. Like he never went there. I mean, it was all,
sorry, I tacked LA onto that, but more so what I was just saying is that whatever's in the water in Boston, I don't know, but it seems like there's quite a bit coming through there. And
did you ever watch the documentary When Stand-Up Stood Out?
I've never seen. I've heard a lot about it. I don't think I ever watched it.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's about the Boston comedy scene in the 80s. So so many. They're murders.
Who put that together? Because I watched a podcast with the person who put it together.
Oh, I don't know. That's interesting.
Anyway, but I have heard a lot. Yeah, no,
it's a really good one. And then Chicago also has a whole lot.
Right.
A lot of people came out of Chicago, but I think it.
But would that be more improv guys because of Second City?
No, they're real good stand-ups that came out of there.
Okay.
But it's, I think, and this is just my nickel diagnosis. Like it's very, the blue collar towns. That's what it was. Like there's real hardworking, just get at it, just go to work. And so somewhere like Boston, somewhere like Philadelphia, somewhere like Baltimore, somewhere like Chicago, and New York to an extent, but a lot of people go there when they're like, okay, I've conquered my town. Yeah. Now I want to go see how I stack up against the other people who conquered their town.
Exactly.
And going to New York, man, I watched a show. So the Comedy Underground, it was CK's show that helped blow it up the way it did. I mean, it was always lined up.
Hot,
but CK's show, and that was hot for a little while. That made it even hotter. So then they opened up the Village Underground, but the Comedy Underground. So I'd never been in the Village Underground until last year.
Right.
So I was like, oh, whatever, I'll go to a show. And it turned out they were doing a Comedy Central taping. And I watched, I knew all the comics other than Michelle Wolf I had met. And worked with a lot of them when they came through here.
She's so funny.
Dude, she fucking kills.
I got to see her live in New York last year too, and it was
the funniest.
Oh my fucking God.
Yeah, she's insane. One of the best.
Yeah.
I watched Schumer a bunch of times too in New York, and when people are like, oh, she steals jokes. I'm like, no. Yeah. She was in Attell. She was in that Comedy Cellar crew, and those people there's some stuff that's derivative. It's parallel thought, but But anyway, that's. I watched 8 or 10 comedians in a row. I watched a comedian kill so hard, 10, 12 minutes, about 15 minutes, about whatever it was, that I was like, I don't know who is going to follow that. Yeah. Like I literally was like, I'm like, it's over.
Yeah.
Like
close it up.
I'm like, and then the next comedian went up and killed harder. And I was like, there's no fucking way.
Yeah.
And the next comedian went up and killed harder. And the next comedian, I'm like, I haven't, look, I've been on shows where I felt outmatched. Like I've been on shows where I'm like, oh boy, you're not fucking around tonight. I'm like, we're not even doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Like I was like, and these are the best of the best of the best of the best. So it'd be like going into the major leagues and being like, I guess I'm just going to play here for a bit.
Yeah.
So I couldn't get over it. Everybody was as good or better. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
It was, and I could probably find the lineup for you if anybody message me extra Lars and I'll see if I can send you the lineup. But Michelle Wolf was one of them. Mattel closed it out.
Oh wow.
So like murderous.
Yeah.
Murderous. And I was just like this is fucking. I did the Hubcap Comedy Festival in Moncton, New Brunswick this February. And a lot of times comedians do like 2 shows a night or 3 shows a night. And so what happens is the comedian who will open this show, they'll rush him across town and they'll close another show.
Yeah.
And like 3 shows in a row, I had to follow 2 of the best headliners in Canada.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, like these people, and I held my own.
Yeah.
I held my own. If you were at the show, you would hopefully people who left went, yeah, it was a good show.
Yeah.
Like they didn't go like, that last guy got smoked. They were like, it was a good show. But so Mike Wilmot, look up Mike Wilmot. So it's a Wilmot. So there's no N. So it's not Mike Wilmont. It's Mike Wilmot. So Mike Wilmot is so funny. And so we're all doing 30 minutes. So there's somebody's going up first and then Mike's doing 30 and then I'm doing 30 and I'm closing and I'm like, who made this lineup? Like this is, and Mike Wilmot, who I've known for a while, just sat at a table and just gave me the business for the hour before the show. Like just, if the lineup makes sense, sure. Why wouldn't they have it that way? And he was like, he goes, here's, he's like, this is one of my favorite lines. I can't do it justice because he's so funny. But he goes, Hendrix used to open for the Monkees. He goes, does anybody compare the Monkees to Hendrix? No. Yeah. They know that they weren't as good. Like he was just like nonstop.
Just letting you feel it, eh?
Yeah. And it's like when that, when you were being made fun of about your podcast, you're like, well, I'm on his radar.
Yeah, exactly.
Like you go through
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny.
The worst thing that getting made fun of is not being talked about.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
guess. But so in those moments when you're on a bill with somebody, like on one of the like Angelo Sarukis, and so I messaged the guy who runs the festival. He's a good friend, and so I messaged him after and I said, I want you to know, at that point I was 16. I would have been just short of 17 years in stand-up, and I messaged him and I said, I don't think you're aware, but if I think the imposter syndrome, do I belong here? I said to the Robert who runs the festival, I said, you gave me hope and confidence that I do belong.
Right.
Because all week of the festival, I had to follow the best headliners in Canada, and I wasn't that far behind.
Right.
I think I looked like I fit in. I think I didn't look too much out of place.
Right.
And I say that with a great amount of humility, with a great amount of respect for the people that I was working with. And it had they put me in the middle of those shows or at the start of those shows, I wouldn't have said boo. I would have been like, yeah, great. Awesome. Yeah. I'm on the show. Like I'm on the lineup with these guys.
In the mix. Yeah.
Right. Sure. And the fact that I was closing all of the shows behind these people, I was like, whether they had to get off to another show, like it wasn't like, oh, Lars is better, let's put him last. They were like, oh, we got to get this guy over here. So this guy goes first and then Lars can close it out. It gave me, I was like, oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. It was a really great moment. Yeah. It was a really satisfying, I bet. Real and it made me go, okay, I'm a part of it too. Yeah. Like that's awesome. I hesitate to say I belong, but I don't. But I'm not out of place.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I love hearing that too. And something that I hear all the time, and it's something when you listen to this many comedy podcasts, you just see the common themes that come up. And one of the ones I was really curious to ask you about is the 10-year mark as a comic. Mm-hmm. That is something I hear about all the time. Like you're not even a comic till you've been in it 10 years. That's when you start, actually getting your feet under you. You're just finding your voice for that first 10 years. You're pretty much just putting on some sort of amalgamation of your favorite comedic influences and you're doing their cadence and you're picking from that. And then you find yourself. Do you think that is true?
Absolutely.
And do you think 10 years is that the mark?
Yeah. So 100%.
Yeah.
100%. So I've seen the arc a bunch of times from both sides, from past 10 years and from before 10 years. So you start out, if you're good. Again, I was a year in when this like nice little, I drew a good spot on a competition and it worked out. And so I got a lot of work after that. In the beginning, you're the new hot shot.
Yeah.
Getting a little bit, any amount of heat.
Yeah.
Like how the arc worked back then is you did 5 minutes on the Yuck Yucks open mic. And then if you were any good, they moved you to a 7-minute spot, which was called Young Guns. So they moved you from Tuesday to Wednesday. And then they sent you to Fairview, Alberta for a 15-minute spot. Nice. And my first ever 15-minute spot, my first ever paid gig in comedy, February 17th, 2004. First time I ever got paid to go on the road. Paid $75. And so you go on the road in that 15-minute spot. So you get a little heat. And then what happens is now you're you're the new kid on the block. You're getting a little bit of work, And then you move to the next. So where you start out probably middling or co-middling, so you're doing 12-minute spots. Then you're emceeing, now you're doing 20, 25 minutes. And then maybe they start to co-headline you. So you're doing 45 minutes now. You're like, okay, I'm doing 45 minutes now. And then, maybe you do 45-minute corporate shows over this and you start glowing. Now you get a little festival here or there. You get a little bit of heat. So then you do the Seattle Comedy Competition and you make the finals. Like you're starting. Then what happens is you go from this middle act MC to like a new headliner, but now you're in the same talent pool as the headliners. So you have no work.
Yeah.
So there's this weird, like now you're could be, you're 4 or 5, whatever, however long, like 5 years in, now you're a headliner, but when you're applying to work at a comedy club, you're applying against guys who've been doing it 15, 20 years. So you're like the last afterthought. You're the last person who gets, but no matter how good you are.
You're a headliner in name.
But you've literally moved up to the next level. Yeah. Like you're against real headliners. Yeah. And so then you work the road and you're doing all these shows. But that period of like 4 years to 10 years, you're really figuring out how to headline. You're figuring out how
finding your voice.
Well, I don't know if that, as cliche as that is, and you hear that all the time. Yeah. I don't know if you're really like trying to fill the time. So first you're trying to fill 5 minutes. Yeah, I've definitely
heard a lot of stories getting out over your skis, having to do 45 when you got 30 stretched.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time, so 2006, I headlined a comedy club in Vancouver. It's still open, actually. And so that was my first ever headline weekend. Wow. So my first ever headline in a club was a Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday.
Okay.
And I got to headline. And so 2005, I headlined. Starting 2003, 2005, 2006, I get my first headline weekend. So first headline weekend, you're really trying to fill that time.
Yeah.
So you're like, and I remember I had 2 jokes left. I only had 2 jokes left of like my setup and then my closer of like the last. And I remember the clock was there and I didn't look at it the whole time. And I'm like, hope I made it to 45 minutes. And I remember looking up at the clock and I went, I'm at 45 minutes. Like I was like literally like, oh, I fucking did it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I remember being I actually remember looking up at the clock and I was like, and then I go, well, look at that. I go, I'm just going to tell you 2 more jokes and get out of here. If I was at 35 minutes, I'm like, I'm still just going to tell you 2 more jokes and get out of here. Like, I'm acting like, well, I got to go. Like, no, there was no more jokes. I was out of jokes.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so, it was, so I do that weekend, gives me confidence that I can, so now you're in this pool against these people. So I think you're trying to fill the time and you're trying to be good, but you're not really like, trying to talk about what you want to talk about yet.
Right.
And so then you figure out how to pace it. You really realize it's weird because when you're doing 20 to 25 minutes, you want to just be like every word is like, and you really can tire them out over 45 to 60 minutes. You want to pace it so that here's a whole bunch of
room to breathe.
Really, and you want to still get them laughs. Yeah. But you like, I want to take you on this. God, it sounds so cliche, and I just like I don't want to sound like I'm regurgitating bullshit. you really do want to pace it. So you're like, okay, I'm going to take them down a minute for here, and then we're going to bring them back up, and then and then in the end, we want to really close strong. Like Mitch Hedberg's joke about, he's like, comedy, you got to have a strong ending and a strong beginning and a strong ending. You can't be like pancakes where you're all excited about them beginning, by the end, you're fucking sick of them.
Yeah. Oh,
Mitch is so great. Yeah. So you're learning that.
Yeah.
And then, if you started headlining 4 or 5, 6 years in, it takes you the 2 or 3 or 4 years to, okay, now I'm at, there's this culmination of my joke writing, who I've figured out how I want to write my jokes, and that there's this bullshit cleverness of like, hey, piece it together yourself.
Yeah.
And then your confidence. And so now I know I can headline the comedy show.
Yeah.
I know I can handle almost any situation.
Yeah.
I know how to, like, I've had 4 wedding proposals on stage at comedy clubs.
Yeah.
I've had 2 different people with seizures. There's been like people having to come in. I've seen fist fights break out in shows. There's not too many things I haven't seen in a comedy club.
And you have to build that up. That nothing but time will give you that.
Yeah. So once you get to that 10 years where you have the experience and you have the confidence and you have the jokes and you understand how to pace a show, I think it's that 10 to 15 year mark where you go, okay, now what do I want to talk about? That's when you find your voice. That's when you really go, okay, what is it I want to say? And now even, applying myself to this for 16 years, I still haven't talked the way that I see a Doug Stanhope.
Right.
And he finds these, last time I saw him live, so in 2005, I was at Just for Laughs, and Doug Stanhope, I was having drinks with him and a group of comics, and he's like, we're going up to my hotel room. And we're all like, okay, we're going up, and we're in the elevator, and there's probably 10 of us. And he had just started dating Bingo, and we're going up in the elevator, and he goes, oh, by the way, there's a rule. If you're in my hotel room, you have to be naked. And so everyone's like, all right.
Yeah.
So everyone's just naked in Doug Stanhope's hotel room. And then he decides we're going to go streaking. So we're going to go knock on doors. There's 10 comedians walking around the hotel in Montreal, just knocking on, and somebody'd open the door and there's just 10 naked people standing there. And so when I think about when I saw him live, and he had this great joke where he goes, so there's this gay football player. It's Doug Stanhope, one of his jokes. He goes, everyone's worried, like, oh, he's openly gay. He's the first openly gay football player. And he came to the CFL for like 1 season, and everyone's like worried about this. Oh, I'm going to have to shower with this gay person. He goes, I got a solution. Fucking partitions. He's like, he goes, these are all multi-million-dollar athletes. We can't go down to Home Depot and just build them their own shower stalls.
Yeah,
like,
no
how
shit.
is this like, why are these football players still all showering in a communal shower? They're fucking millionaires.
Yeah.
And so, he pokes holes, and there's so much logic and funny in what he does. And so when you heard that bit, you were just like, how brilliantly crafted was this bit? While at the same time sending a message. So you were laughing so hard throughout. And I never ever want to disrupt the flow of a comedian. And I was in the crowd that night, and he was like, hey, what do you do? And all my friends looked at me, and I went, drywall.
Perfect, eh?
Because I'm like, I'm not telling him. Because I would have been like, oh, we've actually met, and he was so nice. Yeah. He'll sit and have drinks with you, and he's so gracious. And he did that, and so my voice, if I ever, I hope it is Doug Stanhopean, Bill Hicksian, Lenny Bruceian,
leaving you with something at the end.
Really, yes,
but still making you laugh your ass up, but leaving you with something at the end.
And that's like when I see Bill Burr do that. When I see a comedian who's exceptional at that, like you. And there's one of the tours I did of Iraq. One of the comedians I was working with said, give them something to take home with them. Yeah, and that's what I want. Yeah, and I don't think I'm anywhere near that.
But that's what you're working towards.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. So that 10-year mark, and Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, talks about the 10,000 hour rule. So in the 10,000 hour rule, they found that it took 10,000 hours of deliberate practice in order to become a master at whatever it was. Not just practice, deliberate practice. Whether you were playing the piano or violin or playing hockey or computer programming, it took 10,000 hours, which is why I thought when you're like 50 episodes, I'm going to be doing this. I'm like, all right, good luck with that. And I do mean that. I don't mean like, I'm like, clearly I heard the passion and the support and how much you love it. And so, when you think about it, 40 hours a week with a 2-week vacation in most jobs is 1,000 hours a year.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh yeah, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, that's 1,000 hours. So if people have had day jobs, you get a raise usually every 1,000 hours, which is about every year. And so hopefully your job does. And so at the end of 10 years, you've put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So in comedy, in rodeoing, in podcasting, in playing an instrument, 10,000 hours.
Yes.
And I've easily put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, whether it's listening or talking. And I think that there's so much, one of my favorite things to do to this forever was always to watch every show over a weekend. So it's nice when you're on the shows. But if you like to say to young comedians, go and watch all the shows for a couple of weeks. If you're allowed in free, watch all the shows, because you're going to see how the headliner navigates different situations, and you're going to learn so much. And I used to just love, I would just sit, and because I got to house MC at the comic strip, I got to just sit and just watch all these headliners work 7 shows in a row, 6 shows in a row. And I just watch them and I'm like, oh, I never thought to do it that way. Oh, what a great way to do that. Oh, that's so great. And I learned so much just sitting there watching masters at work.
Right.
And I learned so much. And so watching in that, you're going to be like, wow, you go, oh, I see what he did there. Yeah. Oh, I see. The magic of it is one of my favorite parts. And I was doing a show in Detroit and the MC was crushing.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, this MC is so funny. And then the middle act went up and was just crushing. And I was sitting there watching this comedy show and I was laughing. And I remember going, man, I hope the headliner's good. Like I was sitting there like, these two were great. I like, what's the last guy going to be like? Yeah. And I lost in the experience of a comedy show.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there like wondering like, gosh. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm the headliner. And I like, there's a back way to get in. And I'm like, oh fuck, I got to get to work. I was just enjoying the experience. Like watching comedy. When I'm just like, this is so magical.
Did your taste in comedy and what you enjoy about comedy change as you got? Because I interviewed one of my buddies the other day, and we were talking about DJing, and we talked about it after. And then my best buddy Chase, after he DJed a bit too, and he said, "Oh, you didn't ask him how learning to DJ impacted his enjoyment of shows?" Because he said, when I started learning how to do it, my taste changed a little bit, and what I would notice would be different, and it changed how I experienced live music. And I was and I was curious to throw that question at you, because I'm curious if your taste in what you enjoyed in comedy, or maybe how you enjoy comedy, tasted or changed as you got further into your career and learning all those tips and tricks that you already seen. And you kind of, I think when you don't have that knowledge, a lot of the it looks like magic, right?
Yeah.
It's like yeah. And then once you start to learn the behind the scenes of kind of what they're doing a little bit, did that change at all, or did that excitement?
So it hurts me a little to say this. So I remember really enjoying Dane Cook's first CD.
Yeah.
I remember really enjoying it. And I hadn't listened to it in 10, 12 years, 15 years. And I remember thinking it was quite funny. Like I remember laughing at it.
Yeah.
We were all on MySpace and he was the hottest thing. And I remember thinking it was so funny. And so had I not gone back and revisited that, I think my answer would be, I think my sense of humor is pretty close. You know, when I was in, high school and Andrew Dice Clay was out and Eddie Murphy Raw was around that time. And these guys were like shock comics a bit. And they were good. And then from, I was a fan of Robin Williams and Cosby and all those people. But I watched a lot of Annie's Evening at the Improv,
right? And
I just loved watching those. So I've always loved stand-up comedy. I would have said my what made me laugh is the similar. But I went back and listened to Dane Cook's first CD, and I have not a shred of the success he's had. And he's very nice. I was like, which is to say, when I watch my comedy now, which was recorded in 2010, I'm like, like I'm just like, oh man. Even my first CD, I listened to it the other day because we were recording the new one, and I went and listened to make sure I wasn't doing any over. Like I'm like, oh, and I was like, oh shit. Well, I think that was recorded. The first one was recorded in 2014, and 6 years ago, I'm like, God, it's good, it's fine. but I'm like, no, that's not who I am anymore. So when I watch somebody who is masterful at what they do, a Bill Burr, Doug Stanhope, Jim Jeffries, Sarah Silverman, like when I watch Sarah Silverman talk at the induction for Chappelle, the Mark Twain Award, I was like, this is one of the funniest human beings I have ever seen. Wendy Liebman, when I watched Wendy Liebman on Aristocrats, I was like, this is one of the most, there's some people that are just so fucking great.
Yeah.
And so Kathleen Madigan, every time I watch her, I'm just like, this is the most magical thing in the world. So I think I appreciate the art form a little bit more. Like when you see somebody segue really brilliantly into the next bit. Kelly Taylor does this thing where he's talking about riding a crazy carpet. Very funny comedian from Saskatchewan. If you're not familiar with Kelly Taylor, look him up. He's fantastic. So he's pretending he's riding a crazy carpet.
Yeah.
And then he puts his elbow down. And then he goes, I feel like I'm sitting at assembly. And then he goes into this big, long assembly bit. Yeah. And the transition you don't realize is deliberate. It looks like he was just goofing around. And so when you see that and you realize like, oh my goodness, is that ever brilliant? Just some people are just like, when you break it down to the minutia and you realize it's deliberate, like they did that on purpose, you're like, whoa, like that's so great. And I love that. So I think when I watch Doug Stanhope, I just think that that's it done perfectly.
That's the apex.
Yeah. And Doug Stanhope has said on podcasts, he goes, I figured out comedy. Like but I think you needed his mind and his desire to be great at it.
Yeah.
He's the current Sidney Crosby. Like I wouldn't say Wayne Gretzky, but he's the Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
He's the best, one of the best ever.
Yeah.
And so I love it. So my taste has changed a little bit.
Yeah.
When I see somebody doing I have a really hard time listening to somebody do the drunk girl voice like that. I just I'm out.
Yeah.
I can't listen to this. And Jimmy Dore, a comedian originally from Chicago, who's been in LA for a long time. He's just so wonderfully funny. Yeah. Jimmy Dore said,
and intelligent.
I bright.
Love his.
Yeah. Jimmy Dore said, and it's funny, like I've worked with Jimmy a bunch of times. He said, when I'm watching a comedian on stage and I see them talking about something that's stupid, I'll tell a somewhat funny story, but he goes, I'm like, you as a comedian, you can talk about anything you want to talk about. You have the ability to say anything in the world. Yeah. And that's what you picked. So I didn't know D'Elia, any of his work. Right. Never heard him, never seen him. But I had a long drive, so I downloaded a Netflix special. It was the latest one. Yeah. Maybe I don't know if there's been one since, but and so what I do is I just plug it into my car and I just listen to it on the drive. So I listened to a couple and they were good, and then I listened to his, and I wasn't familiar with his work. Right. So he had a couple of bits on there where he goes, they say you can do anything you want to do. So Chris D'Elia, but again, I'm not familiar with his work. Yeah. So they say you can do anything you want to do. You can do anything you put your mind to. You put anything you put your mind to. Really? Could you shit out of your eyes? Huh? Could you shit out of your eyes? I bet you go your whole life, applying yourself. Could you shit out? Look at that. Every day you can, I can't shit out of my eyes. I'm like, that's your fucking joke? Yeah. Like you put that on a special? Like I got some old bits that are garbage, but I don't think any of them are that shitty. Like I think it's the
pun intended.
The dumbest, one of the dumbest jokes I've ever heard. Yeah. And I'm like, wow. And there was another one on that where I'm like, God, I don't know. Like now, if Netflix said to you, we're going to give you $4 million, but we need that special out by this date, there's going to be some stuff on there you're not proud of. Yeah. Like if you had to churn out a special, it might not be great. Yeah. Now, I don't have a Netflix special, so I have no real so I tweeted, I really enjoyed this person's special. I really enjoyed this person's special. And I did not tag Chris D'Elia. I said, a little bit Dane Cookie. Was his previous stuff better? Now, you could find the tweet if you just search Chris D'Elia and extra Lars. You can find the tweet if you want. So now, I didn't tag him because I don't know. I don't know his shit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think that there are a couple of jokes on that special were terrible? Yeah, I fucking did.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't funny and they were dumb.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's a joke you would tell. Like a fucking open micer would barely tell that joke. Like, what are you doing? And so I was surprised. I was quite surprised with how elementary some of the jokes on that special were. And again, it's possible somebody gave him $10 million and said, turn out a special. And he's like, I got to fill it with whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, could be. You never know. Right?
Right. So I don't know. So a friend of mine, well, not a friend, a guy I know, tagged Crystalia in a comment. And he goes, get ready for the Grand Slam.
All the babies coming after you?
For 7 days straight, Crystalia fans fucking attacked that 7 days straight. And I was like, what the fuck? So your ego is so fragile that if anybody says anything negative about you, you sick your fans on them. This is what you spend your time doing. And there was other people who like messaged me who were like, yeah, they're like, I said something and he searched it himself and found it. Yeah. So he searches his own name on social media, finds it, and trashes people. Hey, look, I don't wish ill will on anyone. The nice part about the entertainment industry, it's a motherfucker. Like, it's the hardest thing in the world. Yeah. So you don't have to root against anybody. If there's somebody out there who's like, I don't like Lars, you don't have to worry about it. I'm a 40-year-old white guy trying to make it in stand-up comedy. And I'm fucking not overly handsome, you know, and I have to work 4 times harder than everybody else to be half as good. Like, I'm fucking busting my butt. But I appreciate that it's like, you don't have to root against me. Yeah. There's a million things where you've been turned down. The rejection in stand-up comedy, in any entertainment, the rejection is what beats people down. That's what kicks people out of it. That people get tired of applying and showcasing and auditioning and not getting it. So you don't have to root against other people. The business will root against them. It will. Yeah. So the fact that Crystalia used his influence for this reason, I was like, if I'm paraphrasing the tweet, but I'm like, was his earlier stuff better? Yeah. Like, I was asking his fans, like, because if it was all shitty like this, how did he become Crystalia? But at the same time, I'm like, I wouldn't ever tag it. And I guess, so I left the tweet up. Like, I didn't take it down. I'm like, I'll fucking own it. Yeah. I shouldn't have said that. You're right. I was saying something negative about another comedian, and I shouldn't have done that. Yeah. You know, one of my dad had a saying, make your words soft and warm, just in case you have to eat them. Yeah. And so I believe.
A beautiful saying. Oh, I've never heard that before.
Yeah. Yeah. Right?
That is great.
It's like, be kind. Why say something shitty? Why are you going to go around and say something shitty about somebody else? Is that how you're going to spend your time and energy? Yeah. You're going to take the finite amount of energy you have and the hours in the day, and you're going to do something negative. So he's like, for a week, I dealt with these fucking idiots. And I was like, mostly apologetic, where I'm like, you're right. I shouldn't have said anything shitty. Like, yeah, fuck, I apologize. Whatever. And I do own it, where I'm like, I won't do that again. Not to Crystalia, to anybody. Yeah. I don't need that kind of karma. Like, I don't need to say something shitty about somebody. Were some of the jokes on that special fucking garbage? Yeah, they were. Like, they were shit. I'm going to shit out I bet you couldn't shit out your eyes. I'm like, what? Like, you're a fucking professional comedian. Like, so, you know, when this controversy came down and they're like, I was like, you know, I think everybody has their own shit. So you're just be like, well, there you go.
Don't throw stones.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
Don't throw stones.
Yeah, exactly. Oh. So a little bit like, you know, it's like, all right. Well.
And that's funny because, I've definitely seen all of D'Elia's stuff. Again, I like all comedy, right? Sure. But definitely he's probably one of those ones where there's comedians that I know that they don't miss, right? Like, you go see Bill Burr, there's not a joke that you're not going to laugh at, right? There's not, but definitely D'Elia was one of those ones where, some of the jokes were, but he's also made me fucking die, right? And also, but I was definitely a bit of a D'Elia hater for a long time, and I didn't get it, and it took me a while, and I think once I listened to his podcast, and that brought me in to get his style of humor a little bit better, to the point where
immature?
A little bit, for sure, but I'm fucking immature to the 10th degree. I am so immature at times, but I have multiple sides, right? That's not my main. I have that in me. It's not the dominant force. I have a lot of different sides of who I am, but it's definitely in there, and I can find that. But you know, you almost have to tap into that. I think it's.
Oh God, why would anybody want to?
Oh, the immaturity.
So, well, yeah, but what I mean is how elementary some of the there's
and I agree with you, and that's what I'm saying. But those jokes, I think all of his jokes have a bit of that immaturity to them, and you can tap into them. But that doesn't mean that they're all good. You know what I mean? Like there's bad immature jokes and there's good immature jokes, right? Like like you can see comics that
they're silly.
Different. They're silly, but they're still well written jokes that have impact. But what you're saying is that's just not a good joke.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's
right?
Stupid joke.
It's just a bad joke.
It's
right?
I saw one funny tweet where they go, when something like this happens where somebody's accused of these things, you have to decide whether you can separate the artist from the art.
Right.
And he goes, and with Chris D'Elia, there was never any art, so you don't have to celebrate anything. There's never. So I think if you found, like Todd Glass said in a podcast, I don't think you're shitty because you tell jokey jokes. I think you're shitty because it doesn't come from your guts.
Yeah.
Like, is it from here? And I've really thought about that a lot over my career, where it's like,
Todd Glass is good at making you think.
Well, yeah. And I'm like, does it come from my guts?
Yeah.
Like when here's a joke, I don't know, I have this silly joke where I go, and I go, so the engine light of my car came on, and I had a thought. I believe the engine light in your car was designed by a female engineer. If you think about it, it's a feminine design. There's probably a big meeting in the automobile industry, and they were like, hey, we should have lights that tell you what's wrong. And one went, just make it one light for everything. And they're like, like make him figure it out on his own. Like your car should just sigh every 100 miles.
Yeah.
You're driving a car, it's like, you're like, what's wrong, car? It's like, nothing. So that, like the writing of a joke where you're like, okay, there's some layers to it. Hopefully it's funny. It's not like when I think of that joke, I don't think that joke is representative of anything other than a funny thought or idea that I had.
Right.
So I look at a lot of these jokes that I've written and I go, okay, it's a good joke. It sounds a little arrogant. It's fine. It's like, do not sound like they're good jokes, but did it come from my guts?
Right.
Like, was it
and
fucking...
And I think that's what we were talking about earlier of those segments of the 10 years and at different stages. I think you figure out how to write jokes and how to do those things first. And then you apply the same process, but from the right place.
So in all of the Chris D'Elia stuff I've watched, probably only an hour and 15 minutes of it, but like two different specials, like one full special and half of another one.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like anything he said came from his guts. It was like this guy who kind of was okay looking, figured out the formula of comedy in that here's the setup, here's the punchline, right? Yeah. Sure.
You definitely can see that.
Here's the formula. I'm just going to put slot A into slot B, and that's going to be the joke. So if you watch Chris D'Elia and you're like, you're like, oh yeah, this is just a guy acting like a stand-up comedian. So which is why I think a lot of the comedy community looked at it and was like, yeah, he's never a fucking real comic. He's just a guy pretending to be a comedian to be famous.
Right.
And so my sample size is quite small. After watching that special on that drive, dealing with his fans for a week, trying to watch a bit of actually my roommate had it on and I watched like 10 minutes of it and I'm like, fuck no.
Yeah.
Like I can't even be in a room with this.
Yeah.
And I just think, comedians owe it to themselves to try and talk from the guts. And now I say that with a bit of hypocrisy because I don't know if I've found the courage to really talk from my guts. I remember asking Rob Pugh once, I said, I heard a rumor. I go, early on, I heard you bombed for a year on purpose. Is that true? I asked him personally, I heard this. Is that true? He goes, yeah. And I was like, fucking really? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, because then I wasn't afraid of anything anymore. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly right. Yeah. Like the idea of like, I'm going to go, for lack of a better analogy, I'm not a huge Rush fan. I know a little bit about Rush, but Neil Peart, the drummer, learned how to re-drum. He took a year off and went and learned how to drum differently, completely changed his style and was better. But can you imagine the fear of completely relearning how to drum when you're one of the best drummers in the world?
Well, you hear that about golfers all the time. A lot of times they say golfers, you'll reach a point where you have maximized everything you can do with your current swing. And if you want to get to the next step, you're going to have to completely redesign your swing. You're going to have to go work with some people. They will look at your body type and they will read it. And that to me, like I get goosebumps thinking about the fear of that being your livelihood, everything you've built your entire life, you grind and grind and grind. And now you have to throw that all out and try and do like the balls that would take.
That is the perfect analogy.
Right.
for how I feel where I'm at in my career. It is the truthful most that like, okay, everybody knows I can write a pretty good joke.
Right.
Now don't write jokes anymore.
Right.
Now talk about
make it count.
Corporate group. Make it count.
Yeah.
Give them something to take home.
Oh.
The idea of going on stage and that learning curve and that process scares the shit out of me. But as we go through this pandemic, as we're figuring all this out, I realize I'm like, well, no better time than now. Like it's because the new version of that swing, the new version of that comedy is going to be better. Yeah. Is it going to suck for a while? Fucking definitely. Yeah. But you know, it's gonna sting, but it has to be done. Yeah. Like I could continue on as like a mid to pretty good headliner for the next 25 years and like have a okay career and do okay and do most of the festivals and have a good time. But I want to be in the conversation with really good comedians. Yeah. That's the conversation I want to be in.
And so much of it is about what you're aiming for. It doesn't matter what you're doing now, as long as you never stop that forward momentum. It seems like, and again, this is me talking as someone that has no idea about comedy, but you see people talk about the comedians that find that set that will kill and they hold on to it and they never rewrite, they never move forward and they never find that. And that's, other than that and quitting are the only two ways that you can not move forward in comedy. If you keep grinding and you keep trying to improve and you don't think you figured it out and you still have goals to attain, is you're going to keep improving. But they say these people just find where they get comfortable or they quit. Yeah.
So I agree. But I think that there's just a tiny bit of extra, speaking for me personally.
Well, that's why you're here.
Well, so it's because I'm always writing new jokes. Right. What makes me laugh. So I have there's a new. It's not quite working, but the idea of I wouldn't want there to be a pandemic, but if you had to pick a year, I think 2020 is a year you'd want it to happen. Right. Because Disney Plus just came out, and you have Amazon Prime. Yeah. And you have Netflix.
You're right.
Can you imagine if this would have happened in the days of Blockbuster Video? Oh. Like you wouldn't have been able to get a new release for years. You would have had to bribe Blockbuster employees to get them to go through the return bin. Yeah. They're like, hey, can you go through the return bin? I'm really tired of watching Ernest Goes to Camp.
Yeah.
And so
don't even get me started on the porn.
Right.
Holy fuck. Then you're hooped.
Yeah.
Talk about Blockbuster.
Yeah. And so when I think about writing that joke. Yeah. I think back to the Todd Glass. It didn't come from your guts. Right. Or I think about give him something to take home. And I think, oh, you've written another cute joke. And so even though I'm writing new jokes all the time, and there is that turnover of like, it's funny, I'll like see oh God, I haven't even thought of that joke in a really long time. Yeah. But it's not that. The jokey jokes that I'm writing, that's not the future. Right. That can't be. Right. It's not how I see comedy. It's not how I think of what I want to get out of it personally or professionally. It's I want to talk about the things that piss me off. Yeah. And most of it has to do with like I always just want to share everything I have. I just take whatever you need. I'll give you whatever you need. Yeah. And that's what matters to me. And that's what I want to talk about. Can I take a heavy topic and make it funny? I fucking hope so. Yeah. I really hope so. That's my goal is to stop being so afraid of talking about what I matter because I don't know how to make it funny. And instead I'm like, do I think the Lazy Susan joke is a good joke? Yeah, it's a pretty good joke. But really? Yeah. Another cute joke? Another little jokey joke?
Interesting.
Kathleen Madigan once, so we were working a club together and she's one of the best comedians in the world. And she comes up and she goes, you're funny. Like she's a friend. And she's like, you're funny. Yeah, we get it. You know how to write a joke. She's like, talk about you. It's like, I don't know anything about you. Yeah. It's like, I watch you for an hour. I don't know anything about you. I don't know how many siblings you have. I don't know what your parents do. I don't know. Yeah. People are like, oh, you grew up on the road with your parents' band? Yeah. Yeah. Why aren't you talking about that? I'm like, I don't know. Why would anybody find that interesting? It's bullshit. And so, the philosophy of what I think stand-up should be, and I would never try and push my philosophy or my vision of it on anyone else. I mean, you look at somebody like Stephen Wright, you would never go, hey, you shouldn't just write jokey jokes. He's one of the best ever. Exactly. Or Seinfeld.
But I think people like that is what their gut, like some people,
it's in their guts.
Some people, that's what's in their gut, right? Like, I mean, I want to say almost Mitch Hedberg, but
Yeah.
I feel almost cheap calling his jokes jokey jokes just because like,
yeah,
it was almost like jokey jokes. Like,
yeah,
but he went so far to that level that it flipped all the way around to where it was
brilliant,
right? Like that's what I'm saying. But that's like the best example I can think of. But that's his gut. Those jokey jokes and what he did with them and where he took it to.
Yeah.
That was his gut, right? But not everybody is. And I think nobody knows that but that person. So if you say, that doesn't feel like my gut, I have to believe you. Because I can't tell you that. Nobody can tell you, but you know what that is. And I think that's what it is. I think people, sometimes everybody's after that. What is my gut? And what am I after? But they get to a point where, I'm 10 years into this and I still haven't found it. Well, I'm not going to keep trying. I know this 30 minutes is going to kill and I'm just going to keep doing this. And then they stop that pursuit because they think, I think they're scared. And I think they're scared that they're never going to find it or they're scared of what will happen if they do. I think it's either one of those two things. And that's and I think that expands past comedy, right? There's so much. I think that was me with this podcast of just, not chasing it and not going after it because I was scared of two things, either the scared of the failure or scared of the potential of what I could do with it. And I think it's very much, you see that in whatever pursuit someone's after. And I think that's something you have to be honest with yourself about, or else you're going to fall into that trap without even realizing it. But I think being honest with yourself is something that is so difficult to do. And so little people are willing to go down that road that they kind of fall into these traps without even realizing it.
Yep. I think that's fair. And especially, did I just turn that mic off?
You're good.
That's a neat observation as to whether or not I'd be interested to know whether or not I thought I was capable of it. I think I am. I do think I am, to be able to talk about heavy topics because there's a really neat thing that's taken place many, many times. You write tags for other comedians. Right. So you come up with a line for another comedian. And when
some comedians like it, some comedians don't, but it's quite commonplace.
Yeah. So I've written tags for like a lot of comedians. There's a lot of them. Yeah. And I just see an angle. I remember writing a really, really good one for a comedian. I saw the callback and I was like, this is hilarious. Yeah, it was so good. So I went over and gave it to them and it became really one of their biggest jokes for a long time. And so it's very easy for me to see the humor, to see the fun. My comedy IQ is pretty good. Yeah. And that's, again, you can't be that comedian who's like, I'm comedy smart. You can't, you dickhead.
But I know what you're saying.
Yeah. So I know that my ability to write quality jokes, understanding the mechanics of it, like here's the setup, here's the punchline, to be able to apply that to corporate greed, to be able to apply that to my feelings about healthcare, which I think should be universal around. I care so much about those things and people taking care of the less fortunate. So those things are the things that matter to me. Do I think I can apply my joke writing ability to those things? I do. And I don't think I'm done yet. And whenever I hear somebody say that on a podcast, it's such an eye roll. I'm not done yet. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Like throw up in your mouth. You're like, ugh. This guy's still like get over yourself. It's just so
I know exactly what you mean. It's like every time I try and promote this podcast, I just feel like, ugh, like who the fuck are you? Like,
it's just gross. Yeah. So anyway, I look forward to getting, because I feel like I have nothing to lose right now in that I'm pretty well established and I get to play all the clubs I want to play. And I'm lucky to be able to come and go as I please in a lot of different places. But I think that in order to get into the conversation of like, that guy's a good comic, like that conversation, we're like, hey, what do you think of this guy's like? Oh, he's good. Yeah. Like I think of somebody like Chris DiStefano, when he got, he's just so brilliantly funny with Chris DiStefano, like, good comic. Yeah. And it happens in comedy where you're like, what do you think of that guy? And he's like, it's pretty good. Like, I can, I look forward to getting at that because I think I'm done. Like, it's time. Yeah. You can't make excuses anymore. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful to see. I think, I don't want to, again, overextend myself, but I feel like because of how much I love comedy, I feel like I really understand what you're saying. And even you explained it very well, but I think even there's more to it even than what's in between the lines. And I know exactly what you're saying. I think you are on that path. And I think you are going to do it. You have that belief in yourself, but I have for whatever it's worth, what the fuck do I know? But I believe in you too, because I think so much of that comes with the passion, and that's what it is. If if you have that, the rest of it will fall into place. Like you said, right at the start of the podcast, I'm the luckiest guy on earth, right? Like the things kind of fall into place. And I feel that way a lot of the times too with that. And I think what that is just true unadulterated passion. And that is so much more important than so many other things. And if you have that, all those other things are going to come into place.
Agree. Also, you have to know how to edit. I don't just mean in a podcast or as a comedian, but if you can figure out where it isn't
Economy
working,
of words.
Yeah. Where is whatever in life, whether you're woodworking, whether you're doing drywall, whatever it is, or you're driving a race car, if you can figure out
running a business,
what's working, cut the fat. Right. So the idea of starting with something broad and then trimming it down, like I'm just going to go to New York, take those thoughts and ideas and just bang them out, because I know that you can really trim it down. You're doing 10-minute spots, 8-minute spots. You're just like, here's the idea, and just it's gotta, you throw it out and take what sticks, throw it out and take what sticks, so that you're no longer, I mean, I like that you're like, hey, here's a funny idea. Oh, here's a fun little silly idea.
And you need to go through that too. If you want to get to the other part, that's those are the first steps. If you try and skip right to, speaking from your gut without realizing how to write jokes and how to, all those other things you talk about, of how to deal with a heckler, how to do all these things, you're going to crash and burn, right? You have to, it all has to work at its own pace. It all has to get there. I definitely would be completely remiss if we didn't at least talk a little bit of Oilers. I love comedy. I want to talk about it. Sure. But I know you're, just from a couple of things I've listened to already, I know you're probably about as fanatical as I am. And but before I get there, I'd be even more remiss if I didn't ask you about somebody else. And it's another one of those things where I say, if you listen to enough comedy podcasts, you just hear these things recur. And one of those things, and you've brought him up probably 3 times already, is Rick Bronson.
Sure.
And I've heard from comedians, like Chicago comedians, LA comedians, Rick Bronson is just this, magical creature that is just one of those people, kind of another person of what I've talked about, that is just those pillars of scenes that not only is in it for the money, but genuinely cares for the people, cares for comedy, and cares about bringing the right people. And I've never met him. All I've ever just heard is this, it's just all these stories about it, right? Andrew Santino got COVID a couple of weeks ago, right? And he was talking about it, and he said, no club owners were calling me asking if I was okay, but Rick Bronson did, right? And that's what he's talking about. So hearing you bring him up this many times, it makes me curious. Who is this guy?
So I wish people would have had a chance. Sorry, I wish people would have had a chance to hang out with Joan Rivers behind the scenes, backstage, because you would have really. She was that funny and that gracious and that kind. On stage and off stage. She was really, really similar. So I'll tell you a little bit about my knowledge based on stories pre-comic strip. So Rick started out, his family lived in Montreal, so he speaks French. He started out as a magician. Oh. So he and David Acker were best friends growing up. This is my own. Just take it with a grain of salt.
For sure.
But I know they're very good friends. And so he's a magician. So Rick Bronson was a magician, started performing very young. Then Rick became a comedian. So I imagine in his 19, 20, became a comedian. Became pretty good. So he's, have you ever seen Ian Baggs' work?
Oh, yes.
So
love Ian Bagg.
So Ian's incredibly funny.
Yeah.
Rick's crowd work was better than Ian Baggs.
Really?
Yep.
Wow.
Rick's crowd work is some of the best I've ever seen.
Wow.
Ever. If you've ever seen Brad Garrett perform, Brad Garrett does a lot of crowd work. Garrett. Yeah, so he does a lot of crowd work.
Okay.
If you crossed Ian Bagg with Brad Garrett, and you'd get a close version of Rick Bronson.
Okay.
They're very, those two combined would be. So Rick was so there's 2 college organizations in North America. One is in the U.S. called NACA, N-A-C-A, NACA.
Oh, right? I've heard some good NACA stories.
Right. And then in Canada, it's called COCA.
Oh.
So the Canadian Organization of Campus Activities.
Right.
So COCA, you go to a COCA showcase. You showcase for the colleges and universities in Alberta. If you do a good job, they would then book you with their colleges and universities. Rick Bronson is the 7-time COCA Comedian of the Year. 7 times in a row, Rick Bronson was named the College Comedian of the Year.
Wow.
And toured all over North America. And he had a rider. He told me this. It was a cool thing. He told me in his contract, they had to give him a hat and a sweater from the college when he performed there. So he would perform at all the Ivy League schools all over the U.S. So Rick, when Dane Cook was huge on the NACA circuit, Rick was huge on the circuit at the same time. So he actually knew Dane and Dane's manager. I don't know if Dane's manager repped him or not, but so he knew all of those NACA guys, all of those Coca guys back in the day, really. And so Rick did a Comedy Now. I think it was his comics or his Comedy Now. I think it was his Comedy Now. He got a standing ovation. It's one of 3 standing ovations in the history of Comedy Now.
Wow.
And just like crushed. So and after all of that, he was a AAA headliner for Yuck Yucks. So he toured with Yuck Yucks.
Yeah.
Eventually went on his own, but he was a AAA headliner. And so when he left Yuck Yucks, he was continuing on with I believe Tammy, his wife, was repping him at that time. I never actually asked that question, but I'm guessing at that.
Right.
So he was out on his own and was doing very well.
Yeah.
And so then they opened up the comic strip. So initially, I believe the comic strip, they were half owners. So there was another investor.
Right.
That was the half owner. And I believe Rick and Tammy eventually bought out the other investor.
Right.
Perhaps they weren't half investors, but I'm almost positive there was another investor in the beginning. So then they owned that. So in those early days, when in November of 2004, I went to the comic strip and I just won this competition in June, and I was still like, a little hot shot in town.
Right.
Same age you are now. And so I told Rick I had won this. I had gone down there on a Sunday. I think it was November 4th or something, November 27th or 28th, whatever that Sunday was in 2004. And so I went down November 28th. I wanted to host, and he let me host. And I was hosting for a guy by the name of Al Lubell.
Al Lubell.
Yeah, Al Lubell's a legend. So I hosted that show, and then I had a good set, and Rick called me to his office, and we were sitting there. He pulls up on his computer, me as the new winner of Comedy Idol, and he said to me, "How would you feel about hosting here every other weekend?"
Wow.
And I said, "I will, but can I have the Orny Adams weekend?" Because the movie Comedian had just come out.
Yeah.
I said, "Can I have the Orny Adams weekend?" And he goes, "Done." So I got to work with the Orny Adams. I've worked with him a few times now. So I hosted every other weekend for about 4.5 years. And Rick would give me all the Wednesdays, all the Sundays, and I would get almost every Friday late show.
Wow.
So I got to host so much. So when he would have corporate shows out on the road, he would take me to open for him.
Yeah.
So I probably opened for him, I don't know, probably 30, 40 times on the road. But then also when he would headline the club or I would work, I watched him, kill.
Yeah.
Crush. Yeah. I watched him kill. I watched him. The first theater gig I ever did was the Vic Juba Theater in Lloydminster, and I was opening for Rick.
Oh, nice.
And I remember walking out on stage, and as I'm walking across the stage, I was like, there's a spotlight. There was a follow spot because it's like a theater, so there's a follow spot. And he did 95 minutes that night.
Wow.
And crushed. So because he doesn't perform as much, he owns 3 comedy clubs, 3.5 comedy clubs with Vancouver. Because he doesn't perform as much, people might not remember him from that time when he was College Comedian of the Year, and he was really on the road a lot, and he really was killed so hard. And so I wish everybody got to see it from through the lens that I saw it through. Yeah. Because I got to ride in the car with him to all these gigs, and I got to hang out, and I got to, watch all this arc of having a club, and then really becoming a successful club. And then he owned part of Red Piano next door. He owned about 10% as far as I know. So I got to see all of that, and he was such a force on stage. And Ian Bagg is one of the best crowd work guys I've ever seen. Yeah. I think Rick was better. And meaning no disrespect to Ian. What I mean is Rick was that good, that good. And so now he's still good. It's still sharp.
You don't lose that. Yeah.
But if you would have seen him back when he was performing a lot,
next level. Hey?
Yeah, yeah. And
I'm so glad I asked that, because I hadn't even known. I had assumed that he was, comedy adjacent because he ran clubs, but all the stories I was referring to was all just about how he runs the club and how nice he is and how good he is at the comedian. So I'm so glad I asked that, because that's a whole other side of him. I had no idea.
Yeah, he was a killer.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And
so then he had a travel show.
Okay.
So I only saw a couple episodes of it, but it was called The Tourist.
Oh.
And so he had his own travel show. So he worked for the Travel Channel.
Holy shit.
And they sent him around, and he would be like a tourist in a city, and he would show you all the things to do in that city. Mm-hmm. The one I saw, I think he was in either South Carolina or North Carolina, maybe Georgia, but I think it was one of the Carolinas. And so, and he was like, people would come to see Rick at the comedy club because they were a huge fan of The Tourist, of his show.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm. He had a big following. Huh. And then he did breakfast television for a little while.
Oh, yeah.
So he was on breakfast TV for a bit.
That was always on in our house in the mornings.
Yeah. Rick was one of the hosts.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I probably saw him growing up and didn't even think 2 cents about it, didn't even put it back together.
Yep.
Huh.
Yeah, he was.
Oh.
And so he's a scratch golfer. We wear the same number. So I wore 19 because of Steve Eiserman.
Yeah.
I don't know why Rick wears number 19, but we played on a baseball team, a slow pitch team together. And I still have my jersey because I went with 91 because Rick took 19.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Oh, well, I mean, if we're talking jersey numbers, that's going to just roll us right into the Oilers. And I was listening to when I typed, so I was more than pumped. I think people that know me a little bit, know how obsessed I am with comedy, will probably know how excited I was to have my first comic on, right? And so the first thing I did was, type your name into the podcast, have them pull up some episodes. And the first thing I noticed was probably half of them were Oilers podcasts. And I go, ooh, this might have just got a little bit juicier here, because I'm a huge Oiler fan. Being born in 93, it's been a little bit of a journey, you could say, over the last couple of years. But seeing what has happened the last couple of years, we may not have had the success, but for me as a fan, it's been amazing to actually have something to cheer for and to be excited about. And that we may not be making deep cup runs every year, but we have a fighting chance every night. And God damn it, there's going to be something exciting. We have some talent that's going to be exciting. And I think there was a lot of things to be excited about last year. Just throwing mine out there, that Nuge, Draisaitl, and Yamamoto line was probably the most exciting thing I've seen in an Oiler jersey. I mean, let's put McDavid aside, in a decade. I was so excited to see what is going to come in the next couple of years. And I just kind of wanted to take your take. I mean, I heard you talk a lot about the Oilers, but it was more specific to the time. But just what do you think of the team going into this year? What are you excited about?
Well, I think that our goaltending is still too suspect.
That's my thought too. And not to jump right on you again, give you 2 words and jump back off you. But what makes me excited is that is one hole to fix. And we knew we had it going in. I was really hoping we'd get someone this summer, but the fact that we didn't, Mike Smith's done next year. He's one more year on his contract, right? And one more year on his maybe career.
Yeah,
right.
Koskinen's glove is better than it was. I didn't think he would ever improve that because I've never seen it. Well, really.
Yeah. How many years in? Yeah, make a big change like that. You're right. That is very true.
So I was happy with that. Mm-hmm. If he can just be in the top 1/3 of the league in save percentage, which is asking a lot. There's some pretty good goaltenders. Mm-hmm. So if we fill the goaltending hole, once Bouchard comes along, that is going to be.
And Samurikov, I think he's going to be special too.
Yeah. So our defense, especially we're going to get 3 years out of those guys at an entry level contract. So I really hope that they develop. It would be nice to just hit one home run with a
D-men
draft
are so
pick.
hard.
Yeah. So I like the lip service that McDavid pays. Right. I think he's all class. I think he is a Gretzky. If you would have bet me $1 million, I'll give you $1 million that McDavid is going to sign an 8-year contract.
Yeah.
I would have lost $1 million.
Oh yeah, you didn't think he would?
There was no way. Yeah. I still don't think he would.
Yeah.
And I like when that happened, I was like, so the greatest player in the world right now is going to sign 8 years in Edmonton. Like, are you out of your mind? There's no way that happens. he's going to sign 3 or 5.
Yeah.
Like there's no way. So the fact that we had him for 8 years was the most exciting. Connor, if you are listening to this,
I'm sure he is.
I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, because you gave me as an Oilers fan a reprieve from the decades of darkness. I want to say there's no pressure on you. Just keep doing what you do. Have fun.
Yeah.
But I was so excited when he signed that. And then to have Draisaitl locked in long term. And then I didn't know if Nuge was going to come back,
I was hoping. Nuge has been one of my stalwart favorites for I just think no matter what you can say about Nuge, you will never fully encompass what he does for that team.
Yeah.
Both sides of the ice,
yeah, he's fantastic.
And then think when you look at just what he can do, that's one thing. But then to understand what he went through since signing, first overall pick, coming into the league with that and just getting dumped on, and any Canadian team, the media, that's a lot to take. And for him not to crumble under that and to still, just grind and, keep his head down, nose to grind. So like, fuck, do I love Ryan Nugent-Hopkins? Like, I would have been devastated. I'm going to be devastated. If I ever have to watch him play in any other jersey, I'm going to be absolutely devastated. Like,
obviously, it'll be like the Ryan Smith days when Ryan Smith left. Same. Yeah, he's wonderful. So, the margins on winning and losing are so thin. It really is. One good third line center, one good second line defenseman,
for sure,
is the difference. With the salary cap, there's been a lot of parity in the league, and so it's really hard to win. What you need is a Taze, and you need a
Seabrook and you need a whole bunch of pieces.
Yeah, and
then they all have to gel.
That's right, and so I would delight. Man, I know we didn't have the cap space, but the idea of getting Fleury, even though he's a little bit older, I was very excited about that. I'm like, oh man, if he's on the table, so it's so I hope we see a Stanley Cup in the next 5 years.
Yeah,
mainly I'm a huge fan, but even bigger than that, I want McDavid to win a cup for McDavid.
For sure. I couldn't agree more on that one.
He deserves. Draisaitl, you're like, yeah, sure, but this is the greatest player in the past 20 years.
Yeah.
And to have him not hoist the Stanley Cup would be a tragedy.
Right.
There were many players over the course of their career who never got to hoist the cup. So it's, I understand, but Cam Neely, it would have been, I'm glad we beat him, but there's a lot of players, Iginla, a lot of those guys
for sure,
who are Hall of Famers who never got to win a Stanley Cup. So I want, at this point in my life, I'm okay with the Oilers not winning a Stanley Cup because of I'd love the team, but
you got to see some though.
Oh yeah. I was at the Stanley Cup parade in '84.
I've seen two
playoff series.
Yeah, 2 years where we made the playoffs and had some excitement in my living memory, because 2006 was the first time I was just old enough to actually go on for the ride, right? And just at that age where you first get to see, that's when you really fall in love with hockey, and you go on that that cup run. It was just so special. And then think, I can't wait for more of this. And then 10 fucking years of nothing.
Well, here's a fun thing that didn't occur to me until the cup run a couple of years ago. So I started comedy in 2003.
Yeah.
2006, 3 years in, the Oilers go on a cup run, and the Oilers cancel so many comedy shows.
Yeah.
So many. Because they, once they made the semifinals, once they were in the finals, it was over.
Nobody's watching
comedy.
100%.
I was doing a fundraiser for the Youth Emergency Shelter Society, and it was one of the games that went into double overtime. They were late getting the comedy started because everybody was watching the game. They shut off the hockey game between overtime periods to start the comedy show.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You made it out alive?
Yeah.
Holy Jesus.
Yeah. Can you believe that? So that cup run just wiped out. I still had a day job then. Just wiped out comedy for a month.
Yeah.
Now, any of the comedians who started comedy after 2006 in Edmonton never had to contend with playoff hockey.
Yeah.
So they didn't experience any kind of adversity in playoff hockey. So when the Oilers made the run, the last one, and it was canceled comedy shows, everyone's like, the fucking Oilers again. I'm like, you should have seen this in 2006.
No shit.
This was the end of comedy for a month. And so people used to ask me between the period of like 2006 to probably 2014. Be like, are you an Oilers fan? And I'm like, yeah, they owe me about $3,000. like once they give me my $3,000 back, I'll be a fan. Till then, fuck the Oilers. No. And I was like, yeah. So it's interesting to know that there's comedians that for 10 years developed without ever having to contend with playoff hockey.
No shit, hey? Oh, man. That's something you can only say in the Edmonton comedy scene because, like, who else has had that kind
Calgary's had, like they went on a run the next year, but after that, they were getting knocked out in the first round every time.
But even that, like, I would take a first round
same.
boot out of the playoffs any day.
Well, and this Fire Pit comedy tour thing that we did this summer. So we just did comedy in people's backyards. So I knew when I was just staring at that date of like when the hockey started, August 3rd, was it? I had that circled on the calendar. I'm like, it's over for us.
Yeah.
Like comedy is over.
Yeah.
And then the Oilers get knocked out. And I'm like, oh, we might be able to get some more shows.
Yeah.
Then Calgary gets knocked out. Then Toronto gets knocked out.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's back on.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to contend with playoff hockey for the rest of the summer.
Yeah. Well, you take the Oilers over that. But, I'm going to plug my ears real quick.
Tough to say.
Yeah.
You know what? No, I would take the comedy because
I can't blame you. Doesn't mean I have to like it.
Yeah. Here's why. I think everybody realizes how hard it was to win in the bubble. So nobody feels like there's an asterisk by winning the Stanley Cup for Tampa Bay. But because Tampa Bay was so good for so long,
it was going to happen sooner or later.
Well, people didn't feel like it was a fluke.
Right.
Whereas if the Oilers would have won after being bad for so long, people would have been like, sure, you won.
Right. In the bubble.
Yeah. So
hometown advantage.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there was too many it would have been easy for people to tear down our success, whereas they wouldn't tear down Tampa's because Tampa was so good for so long. Right. So they're like, they deserved one. Whereas if the Oilers would have won that one, they would have been like, but they would have been a lot of
asterisks all over the place.
I think so. So the reason that in this state I take the comedy is because I want to win a Stanley Cup, but I don't want it to have any, like, there's no questions. We deserved it.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I want to.
All right. Well, your logic saved you on that one. You're back in my good books on that one. Well, I can't thank you enough. That was probably the funnest 3 hours of my life. I've been so deep into this comedy. I've just had such a deep love for this comedy thing, whatever you want to call it, for so long. And I feel like I've never actually got to talk comedy with anybody because nobody matches my level of obsession with it. And it was so much fun to actually be able to, talk some of these things out and actually have you, volley the ball back to me a couple times. We can go down a couple levels. I enjoyed it so much. Getting to talk a little Oilers at the end was awesome. But
are we going to start the show now?
Yeah. Yeah, we're about ready to start it up. We'll be here till 2 a.m, baby.
Oh wait, I need to hit record.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Brendan. That's all we got, Brendan. Guy on the keys. But this is very exciting for me to say because I actually know that you will have something to say here, and I've said this 35 times, and everyone's like, I got nothing. Do you have anything to plug?
Sure. If you like, when is he coming on? What's that? Plug your podcast in the upcoming episodes.
Yeah.
Well, if you're on social media, if you're on Instagram or Twitter, you can follow me at Extra Lars, EXTRA Lars. It's funny to have to spell extra because people always put in XTRA.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, extra, like the word extra, just extra, EXTRA Lars. And then I follow everybody back, so it's pretty cool where you just go to Instagram or Twitter, you follow Extra Lars, I'll follow you back, and then you can unfollow me. And you'll gain a follower. It'll be like...
Yeah, beautiful, eh?
And then, so I recorded at the Myra Horowitz at the University of Alberta last November, I recorded a new comedy CD. We've started working on the editing only a year and a month later. The guy who's the sound engineer, Mike Brazo, has been on me to get the editing. Yeah. He edits it, but I haven't given him any instruction or direction.
Yeah.
So that should be out right away. I'm very lucky that I can just send it to people for free. Mm-hmm. So I might put it on my website for sale, but I think it'll be like pay what you want or just for free. Like I just Dropbox to people. And my other CD, I will send you that. But it's very interesting to have something from like 2014 at 6 years old and to go like, like I don't know if that that's the perfect word for it. I don't feel like it represents my comedy. There's really clever moments in it. There's moments when you're like, oh, that's a pretty funny moment. And it's a good CD start to finish, professionally produced. But I almost want to send it to people along with the first one, definitely with a caveat, but along with the next one, because they'll be like, oh, this is a very different, very different person. I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope so.
I know so. For sure. Guaranteed. If you can't say it, I can say it. So that's awesome. And there were so many things that I wanted. I wanted to get more into the fiber comedy, starting the Okanagan Comedy Festival. I've spent every summer of my life in Penticton, BC since I was zero years old. It's my favorite place on earth. It was one of the main things I want to talk to you about, but there's just too much to talk about. So you're definitely going to have to come on here again sometime in the future, and we'll get into some of the other places we can. And maybe it'll be in New York by then. Who knows?
Or Smith, Alberta.
Hey. About the same thing, though. New York, Smith?
Yeah, exactly. You've been to one.
Yeah,
when I was in Smith, Alberta, I'm like, is this Times Square?
No shit, hey?
I'm pretty sure this is Central Park.
Beer tastes the same. The same. Awesome. Well, thanks again. That was so much fun. And I'm sure if I can convince you again, you'll be on here as many times as you want.
Well, my pleasure. And your sister did such a wonderful job with that interview.
Awesome.
If people haven't heard that one, they should go. They'll get to know you a little bit better. She did a good job.
Yeah, she's going to be on here quite a bit of times too. She's my hero. I love her with all my heart. And she's the one that supports me and keeps me buoyed up when I get down. So that's everybody needs that. It's very important. That's a big cog in the wheel. We want to talk about important pieces. You can't succeed without that. So
perfect.
Awesome.
Well, take care.
Thanks,
Happy holidays. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Thank you so much. Oh man, what did you guys think of that one? I hope you guys liked it. That might have been my most fun I ever had doing an interview. It was late Friday night. Lars had already done a couple shows that day because he's just a workhorse and that's how he rolls. I felt bad kind of keeping him late there, but I couldn't stop asking more questions. I knew he'd been going for a really long time, and I kind of wanted to cut it early and make sure I got him home in a decent time, but I was just so excited and I had so much to ask, and I honestly didn't even get to so many things like the Okanagan Comedy Festival he started and like the business side of that. I was so interested in that, and what else, like his hour special and that process of his first taping. I know that's a huge deal for a comedian. I really want to ask about that, but that just means there's more for the next time Lars comes on. If I can convince him to come on again and give me that much time, it might be a hard sell, but I hope not. I hope he had fun too, and I'm sure he did. So yeah, I really can't thank him enough for coming on and allowing me that opportunity, and I can't wait to take it and run with it and see where I can take it going forward. So like I said in the intro, if you guys could follow Lars on all his social medias, follow my social medias, the VonDubCast, tell a friend. That's how this thing grows, and I'm having so much fun doing this. So thank you guys for supporting it and making sure you keep on listening, because that's what makes me keep on recording it for you guys. So hopefully it's getting better each time, and you guys are having fun as well as I am. So bye.